All right, let's see if this works. Aha! I think I'm finally. Well. Ah, Fun connection issues aside. Hello and welcome everybody. If hopefully everybody can migrate over. I don't know why I keep having so many problems with this, but it's just always fun trying to get one of these things going. So hopefully people can. Hi Brian. Yes, Happy New Year indeed. Yeah. Wish I meant for easier live streaming on YouTube, but we'll get there. At least I've kind of figured out that it's going to take a few minutes, and no matter how well planned I have it or scheduled or set up, I'm going to have to cut and paste and make a few dummy streams really fast to try and get one going. So give everybody a few minutes to mosey on into the super new stream. So I'm so glad I plan these things out and schedule them and try to post about them at least a few hours in advance, and then get to the point in time and I'm sitting here and then I'm just like scurrying like crazy, just going, oh crap, it's not working. Oh man, no, restart. No, restart that one. No. So, hello, A-Track. Welcome, sirs. So yeah, just always the usual fun trying to get the connection going, and it's been pretty good. So hopefully we don't have any flubs. I know in some of the last couple ones there were one or two spots where it gets all wonky for a second and drops connection. So hopefully we don't have too many of those. It was a pretty good holiday. I don't go out for any New Year's celebrations, so usually I'm just watching the ball drop and so on and so forth, and drinking way too much ginger ale. So always have to have ginger ale. I'm done with Halloween films. Yes and no. I never get to all the ones I want to. And then sometimes I try to split it up. So like some years I'll focus on like the Vincent Price, Roger Corman, AIP films. And then I always do Universal and Hammer. But some years I watch like a lot more of them because it's impossible to squeeze everything into the horror season. So otherwise, if I did everything, I'd be watching horror until... Oh, gosh, I'd be into February and March just to squeeze every last thing in. So yeah, I'm finally done and sprinkle in a few holiday things here and there like I usually do. And sometime I'm gonna just go through and do like all the classic holiday titles I can find just to say I've finally seen them. So I can understand all of the classic Hollywood references on the best Christmas movies list that usually have like three things pre 1970 as like a nod. I've seen most of them, but there's still I haven't seen every single holiday film, and some have gotten nice new transfers recently, like the Bells of St. Mary's got the beautiful new olive signature release I'd like to pick up. So I would like to check that out. Ronald, hello, sir. Yes, a very merry new year to you as well. Brian watched the Mike Nichols picture Wolf with Jack Nicholson. Yeah, that's an interesting picture because it's Jack, and it's Jack turning into a werewolf. And the fact that Mike Nichols made it, it's not a typical horror movie, and it's not a typical, I don't know what you would call adult dramedy where it's all about class clash or class culture, the business world, but mixed with a horror movie. So I think it kind of has a bad rap, but it's not bad or anything. It's just an odd blend of it's really an odd blend of genre, I guess. It would be the easiest way to describe it. But I remember it being pretty decent the last time I saw it, but that was years and years and years ago. I was just, it's like everybody else. You go and see that just because it's the one where Jack is a werewolf. So it's just like, well, you guys see it sometime. Let's see. Oh, Merry New Year is a Trading Places quote. Yeah. I finally got that on Laserdisc not too long ago, so I need to watch that. Although it's got one of those weird tags saying parts have been rescored, so I don't know what parts that they refer to. But yeah, I really want to watch that because it's one of those Paramount discs where they put out a DVD and they've recycled it, and it's an old master, and the Blu-ray is an old master, a lot like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and 48 Hours and others. So I'm excited to check out that Laserdisc. I need to just go ahead and fire it up since it's still technically kind of holiday season. Partly that's why I want to talk about the Thin Man some, because they're well, at least the first one, technically, it falls between that era of Christmas and New Year's, so it's right smack dab in the holiday season, and it fits in perfectly because sometimes you need to commiserate with fellow people who are tired of the holidays. Of course, if you drank as much as they do, and especially the first two Thin Man films, I don't think you'd be able to walk for 6 weeks, but I digress. They're perfect for the holiday season. And if you talk about one, you have to talk about the whole series because they're all just wonderful. So let's see. Brian Rudy watched The Rock. I need to spin up the AC3 Laserdisc. I have the Blu-ray, which is actually a nice Disney release with PCM 5.1. It's one of those few Blu-rays with a lossless PCM track. Pretty much all the Disney 90s action thrillers on Blu-ray are like that. Enemy of the State and Crimson Tide and stuff like that. But I do have the standard AC3 Laserdisc, and I do want to check it out. So I'm going to fire that up pretty soon and just spin through it and see what that's like. The problem I've been having, though, is my trusty main speakers. One of them has picked up a bit of an issue, and I think it's the diaphragm in the tweeter. So I've got to find a replacement. So I went to watch something, and all of a sudden I noticed, man, all my high end in my right channel is gone. This is weird. And so I stopped everything and then spent like the next hour checking all the wiring and redoing stuff. And then I'm like, oh crap, it's my speaker. Damn it. And I have really nice old school Klipsch tower speakers from about the late 90s or so. So they're really nice, really solid. I got a great deal on them. I love them to death. But apparently the diaphragm and the tweeter can go. And so I'm just trying to make sure I get the right replacement part, because there's different sizes, of course, and I'll probably have to get a third party piece. So I had to write into Klipsch and ask if they could tell me the model numbers so I could get the specific part. And I'm sure they won't have like a replacement diaphragm for a KSF speaker from 1997, but you never know. But anyway, so it's like all of this, like all of what we do, it's a fun learning process. I've never actually worked on a speaker before. I know people who that's their hobby, fixing old speakers and old vintage gear. And I actually bought these from a guy who goes to estate sales and buys speakers and stuff. And these were super minty. But because they're not like a desired model or anything, he sold them to me for like super, super cheap. I paid like $150 for the pair of them. And I've had them for about 3 years or so, and they've been wonderful. So hopefully I can get this diaphragm. And it looks like it's only about a $16 replacement part. So, and it's not too hard to replace. Just pop the actual tweeter out and unscrew the back, and then just very carefully replace the diaphragm. So that's what I'm working on right now. So currently, any home theater watching, I'm pretty much just having to go back to my monitor can headphones and just watch at night, which is usually what I'm having to do anyway. I don't get all the time in the world to crank it up really, really loud. So I'm just having to focus more on classic titles, mono titles, stuff like that. But as soon as I get that back up and going, I will spin through The Rock, because I've been meaning to do that anyway for way too long. So anyway, that's what I've been dealing with is figuring out what the heck happened to my speaker. B, is it dead? C, please don't let it be dead. D, I can't afford to buy the modern replacement because that's like 6 or 7 times the cost I paid for both of these. Yeah, always, and I've babied my speakers. I don't know why it suddenly decided to up and go. It actually went on the 4K restored It's a Wonderful Life. So I was 10 minutes in and noticed something was really, really wrong. And I'm like, wait, this isn't the disc, is it? No. Okay, on headphones it's fine. It's not my receiver. It's not my wiring. And then I finally took one of my rear channels, unplugged it, disconnected it, and brought it up front and connected the leads from my right channel to that, and it was fine. So then I knew it was my my tower speaker, and I'm like, oh crap. And then I look up what's the equivalent, and it's like the Klipsch I don't know if it's the Icon or the Synergy series, but they're like, $550, and I'm like, oh, geez, can't do that. But anyway, so that's what I've been doing, and that's why I haven't been able to spin a lot of big action-tastic funness as of yet, because currently my right tower is in the workshop. So, uh, oh, Ian Stuffer. Hey, man. How's it going? Got a pan and scan Laserdisc of Escape from LA. Oh, I didn't realize they made that in pan and scan. I do need to get the regular one. I haven't seen it in a long while, and I remember because I saw it at a very young age, and I remember the effects being the really, really cheesy effects and stuff. And I know that hasn't aged well onto later masters, so I want to get the Laserdisc version, and of course, it has that really cool cover art too. And if it's a '90s movie, you might as well get the THX mastered Laserdisc with AC3 and just go full on vintage and enjoy it for what it is. So I need to do that, but yeah, I'd forgotten they have pan and scans of those, and like I did with Congo, I don't want to repeat that situation where I buy a pan and scan copy and then I'm stuck with a pan and scan copy of, a 90s title that most people wouldn't probably buy anyway. And then the widescreen version is super common, but I'm stuck with a pan and scan. So I've still got I think I still have that pan and scan Congo copy floating around somewhere. So go figure. But yeah, then again, on the flip side, a lot of those pan and scan discs are a lot rarer and technically more valuable. So I guess if you really love those, then that's a great deal. You found a pan and scan. Oh, Brian got a sealed copy of The Roan Most Dangerous Game. Oh, awesome. And the seller said never disclosed it was sealed. That's really cool when you get something like that on eBay. Usually you worry about getting burned or something gets to you and it gets lost in the mail or it's not packaged well or you've been misled. But it's really nice when it goes in the opposite direction and you actually get something and it's like pristine and it was just like graded very good or never watched and you get it and it's still sealed and it's like, oh. So, every once in a while you get that really awesome experience. Pete's in the house. Hey, man. Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, I had pretty good holidays, so nothing to complain about. It's nice and pretty chill actually. It's nicer when the holidays are not just full of hecticness and such. Plus, my family and relatives usually, because we're all in different states and stuff half the time. So a lot of them didn't come up for the holidays, so they're going to come through later on. So some of the Christmas stuff that we would normally do, we probably won't do for another week or two anyway. So it was just nice and pretty quiet and chill. So I got to cram in a few extra things here and there outside of my right channel deciding to suddenly go crazy. Oh, Heat with Pacino is my Christmas hangover movie on December 26th on the LD. That is that's a great version to watch. That's usually the version I do watch. I don't actually. No, I think I take that back. That's the only copy I have currently. The first DVD is probably a port, but the LD is supposed to have the unaltered AC3 track, and it is really, really punchy and really, really nice. It's a pretty good pressing for Warner Brothers from the mid '90s. It's not, if you know Warner Brothers, they're never as good as say an MGM press disc or a Sony press disc. Of course, if it's not DADC rot and stuff like that. But given for the time period, I was very nicely impressed by the transfer, and of course, supposing to be much more theatrically accurate with that audio mix. And of course, now they've done a new 4K master. The remastered Blu-ray's out there, and it looks pretty good. So I would have picked that up, but I'm waiting to see when it drops on 4K because I'm sure they'll just bundle them together, and then it's like eventually they drop down to like $10 on sale. And if you go out and you spend $5 or $10 on the remastered Blu-ray by itself first, then you kind of kick yourself and go, "Why did I do that?" Instead of future-proofing later on. So that's what I'm looking at. For potential upgrade. I do enjoy going back to Heat every once in a while. I know I've talked about it some before. It's not a particular favorite of mine, nor do I understand like the super intense adoration a lot of people have for it. I do still really like it and really enjoy it. I think it's very good. But it's not something I go back to a whole lot. So the Laserdisc is kind of been my go-to anytime I feel like revisiting Michael Mann for 3 hours. So, Unaltered Trilogy doesn't need the rear channels. Unaltered. Oh, I guess if you're talking about Star Wars, yeah. If you're listening to well, yeah, I guess technically, I don't know if anybody's done any of the fan preservations on Jedi with the mono in it, but if you're listening to the preserved mono tracks, then yeah, you wouldn't need rears. My problem is it's my front right channel has just gone out, so I'm stuck headphone listening currently, or I'll have to pull out my bookshelf surrounds and move both of them up and drop back down to 5.1 for a while, which if it takes a while for that diaphragm to get to me, once I find the right one, I'll probably just do that just to have something going again. But yeah, once you go to tower speakers, it's hard to go back to bookshelves. I mean, I just have them for my mains, but it definitely does make a difference. So it's kind of hard to go back. If anyone wants to have a mind binge, watch the Thin Man series along with the Charlie Chan series. Yeah, that would really start to, they'd all start to blend in together. And then, especially if you like threw in every 30s and 40s detective thriller series, like the Thin Mans, the Falcons, the Saints, the Charlie Chans, and then when they would move to other studios, so the later Charlie Chans, especially all the actors they went through, and then why might as well throw in all the Mr. Motos with Peter Lorre. There's so many different ones. And then all of the Monogram detective pictures and all of the Poverty Row detective pictures and the super cheap detective serials. You'd get very, very confused very quickly. Did anyone watch the new Star Wars? Oh, jeez. I wasn't going to. But then I had some spare time and I heard of how much of a train wreck it was. And I decided, if I pay my $6 at the matinee, it goes to my local independent mom and pop theaters. So I'd rather support them. And, it's like ripping a Band-Aid off. You're going to have to sit through chunks of it anyway. And I'm like, surely it can't be, as big of a train wreck as what this stuff is indicating. And then I sat there for, 2 hours and 20 some odd minutes like this. God, what have I done? Mixed with, it doesn't work that way, but just, yeah. I mean, some people do like it, but I don't understand how. Rise of Skywalker is it's a train wreck. It really is. It's damage control to try to undo the last picture, and it's also proof they've had no game plan for any of this, and they just want to get it over with, and it doesn't make a lick of sense if you really look into it. And honestly, probably the worst problem of all is that if you took out every repetitive, unnecessary scene or sequence that didn't do anything really to advance the plot, you'd be left with about 12 minutes. And that really says something. Because you get to a point where you're like, if you had to watch, you'd just be doing this. It's like, is this over yet? Is this over yet? Because you just stop. You don't care at all, and then you really stop caring. So yeah, it's a mess. So like I said, I treated it like ripping a Band-Aid off. You're gonna have to do it sooner or later. So that's what I did. So I don't have to see it on Blu-ray when it comes to disc. I don't have to ever go through it again. So I got it out of the way, and my little $6 matinee ticket is not going to add to its giant spoils all that much. So I feel better about myself. So I got it out of the way. But of course, make of it what you will. And like I said, some people really did seem to like it, but it was definitely noticeably less this time than Last Jedi was, both critically and in overall consensus, because there were other people in the theater who also were seemingly expressing their discontent, and there wasn't a big fanfare around it like there was for the past two. So I think it was a matter of everybody's just ready for it to be over, and they're just pushing into television, and especially with the Mandalorian going on, that's where their focus is. So it's just like, okay, we gotta wrap this up, got to get it over with. not quite with the we have to end this feeling like you had with, say, Dark Phoenix and having to finish off the Fox X-Men series, but it kind of reminded me of that in a little way, in terms of they just wanted this to disappear so they could focus on their new television strategy. So, yeah, I would definitely not recommend sitting through Rise of Skywalker, or as I would call it, Rise of Pain. Uh, so, or no, I should just say Rise of Confusion, because it doesn't make a lick of sense, and it's filled with constant visual and situational references, primarily to Return of the Jedi, but also there's a lot of Empire references. So much so that they all go to a desert planet and are wandering around and happen to, turn a corner and run into a guy with a face mask on, who, of course, is Lando. And I'm like, just go ahead and call him Tamtel Screech, And then shortly thereafter, they hop on vehicles and take off during a chase that is, of course, pretty much like a reprise of the speeder bike chase on Endor, but it's still on a desert planet. So they have a battle in the desert, so they don't have to redo the sail barge from Jedi. It's just like, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I will not go super into it, because if I do, it's just be like pouring out all this festering wound that I'll just be totally rambling. Um, Oh, Peter's never seen The Thin Man, so I should be talking about random things. Oh no, that's fine. And with these, it's really hard to talk about if people have never seen them, because of course they're technically whodunits, so you don't want to spoil the actual whodunit part, because they all build up to a final denouement. But the way they're done are very stylish and very very witty, and it all happens in like the last 2 or 3 minutes of the movie, and it gets super fast, whereas the rest of the movie's been like a fun romping ride up to that point. So yeah, again, with all of these, I'm not really going to be able to get much into plot, because I don't want to spoil the plot for anybody. But what's also interesting about these is the more you go back and revisit them, you can still find things to enjoy and new things to enjoy that you didn't catch the first time, because you were too busy trying to follow the mystery thread. And what's also great about these is they're also very good at having, because there's a whole cast of characters for each film that basically, are technically all suspects, as you would have in any murder mystery. But this series is very good at doing red herrings and, setting up not just one or two, but several characters as, potentially being the guilty party, and keeping you second guessing yourself right up until the very end of the last reel. So again, it's really cool to go back and see these more than once and get the nuance and the richness and the texture, and also again rediscover things you didn't see the first time because you were too busy trying to figure out who did what where. Yeah, fall back to 5.1 temporarily. Yeah, honestly, most of the stuff I do watch isn't even 7.1. I just have it. It's nice to have it there. But if you fall back to 5.1, you lose the ability to do ProLogic 2X, which is the improved decoder for mono surround ProLogic. So, but then again, I could just watch straight 5.1 stuff or straight mono stuff until then. So yeah, if it takes a while, I'll just do that and rotate stuff around. Were the Creature from the Black Lagoon films and the were they salt water so the creature can survive in both? Honestly, I'm not exactly sure. I guess technically it's both, because the first one is in the jungle, but I don't know. I guess that would be technically freshwater because it's a lagoon. And then the second one, it's at Marineland, which would technically be freshwater unless they put him in a saltwater pool. And then, of course, Creature Walks Among Us, he has the operation and then can't go underwater because he has lungs instead of gills, because some bright mind decided, we'll just experiment on this thing. Why not? So yeah, that's a good question, I guess. And I guess technically, if you were to look at the production, I guess it was all freshwater because it was freshwater at the studio tank when they shot the studio stuff, and it was freshwater in Florida at the location they used for the original film. So I guess he's a freshwater gill man. I don't know. Maybe he can do both. I don't know. That's a good question. Um, A-Track got the Criterion CAV of RoboCop as a Christmas present. Oh man, that's super cool. I wish people getting me presents would be that attuned to detail. It seems no matter how detailed the list I give people, if they ask for gift ideas, I've my whole life I would write everything out, every last detail, where to get it, how much it costs, how much to not overpay, catalog number, everything, and then I get like a $20 bill in a card or a gift card or something. I'm like, well, at least I can go and use this for Laserdisc or whatever I'm looking for at the time. But yeah, that's really cool when people take the time and actually try and figure out exactly what it is that you'd like. I would like to see the CAV Criterion disc at some point. I've seen the DVD several times. I've just never found the CAV version for an affordable price. Usually on eBay, they jump up at the last minute. But now that the lovely Arrow set has come out, I think that will hopefully make the Criterion values start to fall back down and make them much more affordable. But it is still a great release, that CIV set. Oh gosh, the CIV Tory story, that I would love to see that at some point. Um, I want to get it on Laserdisc anyway, because that's the only one that's supposed to be mastered from a 35 millimeter source. All the rest went back to the digital master. So I would like to see the CAV presentation. Into the nerdy audio talk, of course. Like most of the changes in the Star Wars mono versus the Dolby Stereo, but I need that pork and scream. Yeah, it's really the first weird the first time I went to the mono, but very quickly it became my favorite and is still my favorite mix. So it's ironic that the film uh, that really broke stereo to the masses and stereo surround and Dolby 6-track 70 mil and all the amount of times I geek out over all this stuff and would kill to see those theatrically, that the mono is my favorite. It's definitely got an old fashioned feel to it, but I think the music is mixed better because it's single channel. I think it's an astonishing mix for single channel, and it's got all of the fixes, the dialogue fixes. It was the intended as the final mix, so it has all the little tweaks done to it. It was the one made last for the general release, and then all those tweaks are what carried over into the '97 special edition mix that I watched a lot growing up. So I was used to some of those alternate things, and then to know they came from the mono, I was like, oh. So that made it easier for me to get back into the mono mix because the first time I ran it, I was like, oh, well, that's different. And man, Aunt Beru sounds really weird. Oh, it's a different voice. Oh, she literally has a different voice. Okay. Um, and then it was strange how the music was mixed compared to all the other stereo and surround mixes. So it does take a little bit of getting used to. But again, some of my favorite things from the special edition mix are in the mono. So it was really cool. Like, I don't know why I love this so much, but it's just one of those things I've always loved in the Death Star Chasm when right before the bridge swing on the rope when Leia's firing back at the stormtroopers up a level. For some reason in the mono they dubbed over the blaster sound effect with the for lack of a better term, the 44 Magnum sound effect or the dirty, hairy gunshot effect. So in the 97 mix and the mono mix, when she pops out from behind the wall and fires, it's got that old, growly, dirty, hairy gunshot effect that I just love. The fact that that's, coming out of a blaster. It's little stuff like that. But then again, you still miss things from the Dolby Stereo and other mixes. So it's really cool that we now have a choice. And the same way with the mono mix on Empire, which was found on the 16 millimeter print that has some of the stuff in the 97 mix that I missed, like some different sound effects. Like Vader has the different reaction when Luke kicks him off the platform. He has that really nice growly, oh, as opposed to the theatrical stereo that sounds more like a blah. Yeah, that's really nerdy comparing Vader grunts. So. But for years, I never knew where the 97 differences came from until it was found on the mono track of a 16 millimeter print. So, and there's monos for all three, but the Return of the Jedi one is not. It doesn't really have any differences. It's basically a fold down of the stereo, but it was cool that they still made them. Apparently, they made them all the way up through Temple of Doom, I think. As far as I know, Raiders of the Lost Ark is the last one where there was a mono with a bunch of differences. I think after that, they realized you could just, fold down the stereo image and get it into a single channel mix without having to make a custom brand new mix. Pro Morgan's test stream. Dun, dun. Love my RoboCop CIV and it's better picture than the CLV. Yeah, especially if you have the same disc and it's from the same print run, you should notice a difference between CIV and CLV. Not a whole lot of difference if they're both pressed really well, but that's going to get more into how good your player is, how good your display and your setup is, if it's very revealing, or of course, the more Laserdiscs to watch, the more your eye becomes trained to how this stuff looks and works, and looking for ringing and aliasing, edge enhancement, contrast boosting, all that stuff. So yeah, usually with CAV, it feels intrinsically smoother. And of course, it's going to have less noise and things. And of course, you're going to have to get up and change disc more often. But yeah, eventually you get to a point where you can notice the difference, even if it's on, say, a single movie and the first two sides are CLV, and then you switch to side 3 and then encode it in CAV. You'll notice it's like, wow, this is a lot better. Why is it only side 3? Why, MGM? Why? I would have paid more. Well, I mean, I would have paid more now, but back then I couldn't have paid more. But anyway. Let's see. Let me jump down some. Every time I go to catch up on comments, it suddenly jumps down, so I gotta find my place again. Watch Falcon Goes West. How good are the Warner Archive Falcon sets? I'm not too sure yet. I have them on my. I've been trying to find some on eBay because it seems like a lot of Warner Archive discs are super cheap for the DVDs on eBay. Even brand new copies, it's like they're sold by wholesalers. So I've been trying to get the Saint and Falcon sets because I would really like to see those. And honestly, I'm sure it's probably the same. I think some got released on VHS. So I'm sure it may be, it's usually just older masters like a lot of other Warner Archive discs. But all the reviews have been pretty good. So it's just been the fact that those sets are usually a bit higher than your standard Warner Archive costs is why I haven't gotten them yet. So I've been keeping an eye out for them because I really want to see them. Because at first I thought it was George Saunders and various other actors, but I didn't realize for the longest time that Tom Conway took over in a lot of those films, and I adore his work in the Val Lewton films. So I'm really wanting to see him, especially in the later Falcon films once he took over, ironically, for his brother. Let's see. One of my friends from school has the 89 ET and the 91 Jaws Laserdisc. Wow. You have friends in school with Laserdisc? Man, that's fantastic. I don't know anybody who owns Laserdisc, really. Outside of, I occasionally run into people who remember them, or they're like, oh, I think I have a few discs and a player in a closet somewhere, or I gave them away years ago or something. That's about as good as I get. Or like if somebody's working in a store and remembers them or has a few or collects a few, that's about as much as I get. I certainly don't know anybody or have any relatives that actively have Laserdiscs or really have actively collect discs of any kind. So I'm an anomaly in that field. But yeah, that's fantastic, and those are two good discs to start with. Honestly, they're they both had later Signature Collection releases, but those are nice starter discs and are not expensive and have good transfers and everything. Oh, peek at the Arrow RoboCop. It's I'm glad you did. It's fantastic. Like, of course, it's currently I'm still going through all the extras, so I still have it out, so it's sitting above my head. But it's it's really stacked, and it's super cheap for the amount of effort that went into it. Like it blew a lot of special edition releases out of the water. And even if you have the old MGM disc and it's the same master, they really went to town trying to polish every last edge of it. So I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's one of the best releases of the year of 2019 for sure. Even though it's not an actual 4K release. So, yeah, if any of you guys are still on the fence, I would definitely go grab a copy before they sell out of the limited edition, because anytime they go to a standard one, you never know what extras they might drop. I don't know if they'll keep both discs in there because it's a 2-disc set. Let's see. Oh wow, A-Trek saving it for beta. Wow, that takes that takes some doing. Excellent. It's a lot of work to find a working beta deck. So I'm definitely on board with that idea. I would love to try it sometime, but the tapes are hard to find, and I've already got plenty of VHS material still. And again, the deck is the hardest part. So definitely good luck in that. Oh, you even got HD DVD player. Wow. And 19 movies. That's honestly, it's an interesting format to collect for, I think, since, the discs themselves are super cheap. I think the trouble would be, getting a good player that does all the audio codecs and then finding the particular disc that you want. You probably have to turn to eBay to find specific titles. But of course, you got to deal with the rot factor on the Warner Brothers disc. Sorry. So what happens when you start drinking ginger ale. Because most Warner Brothers HD DVDs have severe rot issues. So definitely check any disc you have from Warner. It seemed to be primarily Warner Brothers from what I always heard, but it may be some of the other studios. But and since there's a lot less HD DVDs, if you were going for like some complete format collection, especially since you see them in stores for like 50 cents or 10 cents, or people just give them away because it's an obsolete format. You could theoretically go out and get a complete run of HD DVD just because, so I've never bought any because I've just not had a need to, because they are all out on Blu-ray. There's some where the transfer is better on HD DVD than Blu-ray, but some of those have been reissued. Like Casino is now out on 4K. The Mission Impossibles have been redone. So the whole what's still exclusive to HD DVD is kind of dwindling, but it would be a fun format to play around with. And I'm sure sooner or later somebody's going to decide that it's collectible, and then the prices will go back up. So if you're interested in it now, would probably be the time to pick up discs for literally pennies on the dollar. One of the songs from Frozen 2 reminds me of A Clockwork Orange. If only, oh man, if only a Disney movie would have those kind of balls, man. It's funny. I have not seen Frozen 2, but man, if there was any fragment of A Clockwork Orange in Frozen 2, I would so go to see it and just be so happy. But nothing will slip past a mouse ever. Let's see. Been finding classical vinyl for studying. Oh, A-Trek getting into like full on classical composers and such. LPs from the 50s and 60s. Yeah, a lot of those vintage orchestral recordings can be really amazing. And of course, featuring the likes of talents we're not likely to see again. So yeah, and it can open a whole new world in terms of musical knowledge, and also be really good study music. Yeah. Let's see. Pete talking about the Magnum 44 sounding. Yeah, it is a weird change, but it is in the mono, so I don't know why all of the changes were made. Some were to fix problems, like adding the close the blast doors joke to punch up the joke, or changing Baru's voice, and fixing some of the audio flubs, and adding the, I think, really important 3PO tractor beam line. Because if you look at the original stereo or any other mix of the film, they're in the control room on the Death Star, and uh, you know, Auto will try to make the precise locations appear on the monitor. And then they all just stare at this little screen and you hear this little noise for like a solid 30 seconds and they all look. I don't think you boys can help. I must go it alone. It's like, that's a little awkward. Did you just magically get by a picture association what you have to do? So I think that was the most important addition of the mono mix and why it's been kept for all the various home video versions and later mixes. Um, but yeah, you really have to have all three original mixes to really get, everything. And it's like, what flavor are you in the mood for? So, the mono has become my favorite, but I couldn't be without the stereo mixes because, those have all of the iconic parts and the missing stuff. So you really have to have all three. Um, oh yeah, the rebel voice on the Death Star approaching voice change. Yeah, it is definitely much more dramatic that way. Whereas, if you compare them directly side by side, the other is definitely a little bit flatter. It's kind of like comparing which also in Empire, the thing with the rebel voice talking about the first transport as a way is much more in your face in the in one mix versus the other. It has the nice echo and it sounds really great. And then they're all like, yeah. Whereas the other, it's like, the first transport is away. The first transport is. I was like, that's not right. That doesn't sound right. Um, Wolf is gonna get the RoboCop. Yes, I totally recommend it with absolutely highest recommendations. Definitely grab the Arrow RoboCop before it's sold out. It's a really stupendous package. And I'm not a huge RoboCop fan, so for me to say that, that's I was really shocked. I thought about getting it, but then Barnes and Noble put it on sale during their Arrow sale, and I'm like, well, it's the same price as what the slim down version is going to be, and I want to see all the extras. And then I took it out of the plastic. I was like, holy crap, I mean, it's got a freaking bumper sticker in it. It's like, wow. Um, let's see. Let's see. I guess what I'll do now, since I've already blabbed on for 40 minutes, I guess I'll just go through recent finds and pickups really quick just to get through those. Um, there's been some interesting stuff on the DVD front. I meant to go over some of these before. I don't know if I did in one of the last shows, but just in case, I'll do it here really quickly. Because there's a couple interesting ones that I picked up. And all of these were in the dollar or less bin. So some of the cases are a little dinged up, but the discs are fine. But some of these are really, really uncommon. So I was like, okay. And of course, none of these really have Blu-ray releases on these particular DVDs. So I picked up the 52 version of Carrie, directed by William Wyler, which is kind of been out of print now for a while, kind of on and off. So this is harder to find with a lovely Larry Olivier performance. And it's a really nice, solid Paramount DVD. And this was only a quarter. So I can live with the DVD case being a bit dinged up because the disc itself is fine and the art's fine. So worst comes to worst, I can always replace the Amaray case. This one was one I've wanted for a long time, not common at all, and I really like it as a film. It's not talked about very much, but this was what the team of Shodzak and Cooper did after King Kong and Son of Kong. They made, again, I think this is quite good, The Last Days of Pompeii, about the erupting of Vesuvius and the destruction of the sin-filled city. And this actually has a pretty good narrative that leads up to the, volcano explosion you wait the whole movie for, with the amazing Willis O'Brien, of course, coming back again and doing the effects. It honestly has sort of echoes of Gladiator in a way, and Fall of the Roman Empire, stuff like that. And there's bits about the class structure of the ancient Roman days. So if you've never seen it, I actually think this is quite good. And Even though you may wait the whole movie to wait for Vesuvius to explode, it's actually a pretty good movie, up until that point, and a great Basil Rathbone performance. And it's also not that long. It's 96 minutes, so it's definitely worth your time if you do find this. It did come out on Laserdisc, so I would like to compare that someday to this, but I'm just happy to finally have it on DVD because this is not common at all. And they nicely kept the pretty cool original RKO poster art there. This one also is not common. This is the full-length feature version of the, I think this is from the 80s. Let me see. Yeah, 1984. This is the feature-length documentary on George Stevens, a filmmaker's journey, directed by his son, George Stevens Jr., who was heavily involved in the AFI. So this, I think, is only available as a standalone, and Warner Archive now, I think, sells this as well. So it's been out of print for a while. So yeah, this basically is just a really nice old school career overview. And again, it's almost 2 hours long, so it's definitely worth your time. Even if you don't know a whole lot about George Stevens, there's so many talking heads of surviving luminaries from the classic Hollywood days. So even if you don't know anything about George Stevens, you can watch this and enjoy it simply for seeing all of the great surviving stars and legends talking about Stevens. But it's really cool to actually find the DVD version. I've seen it before, but primarily just on TCM showings. Then next up, I've been trying to pick up these when I find them. Universal did a number of Western film releases when they first started doing Westerns on DVD. And since then, they've just been doing them in condensed down packs where they shoved like 3 or 4 movies on a disc and really cut down the bit rate. So whenever I find the original discs with single and dual layer disc, I pick them up when I can. Simply for more Western experiences, and because I guess really difficult to find original DVDs, and you can pick up these multi-feature sets for super dirt cheap, but like $10 for 10 movies crammed onto 2 or 3 discs, whereas if you search around long enough, you can find the original discs with 1 movie on them for like 50 cents or $1. So I'm like, I'll just wait as much as I want to see some of these. So I picked up the Universal Western releases of When the Daltons Rode and the Cecil B. DeMille picture, The Plainsman, which is a pretty interesting early Western with Cooper and Jean Arthur. And of course, Dalton's Road is a Randolph Scott Western. So you get great star name value in both of these, and they fit in the same cover design as the other Universal Western DVDs, again, before they kind of just abandoned doing a special line of Western DVDs. And also, what's cool about these is they have these little textured inserts with original poster artwork, which is a really nice touch. You wouldn't think they would put any extra effort into these, but they did. So that's also pretty nice. Again, you can get these films for dirt cheap in these multi-feature sets on Amazon or Walmart, but yeah, this one doesn't have the poster art, but it has a picture of the titles they did. They only did about 8 or 10 of these, so I've been picking them up one at a time when I find them, simply because they don't pop up all the time, and I would like to have the full bit rate of a movie. I really don't like it when they cram 3 movies onto a single disc, and like the original disc size has been cut in half. So that's those. This one again is another blind buy of a Western. I've heard it's pretty good. Olive did do it on Blu-ray pretty recently, but an Olive Blu-ray for $20 versus you find the Old Republic DVD for 75 cents. So I picked up the Republic release of King of the Pecos, which is a pretty well regarded 30s John Wayne Western when he was doing all of these B Westerns, trying to get back into major features. So it should be a pretty good watch, and probably the only other good release outside of the Olive Blu-ray. So there's that. And oh, hang on, everything fell off. That's the problem when you have too much stuff stacked up. Okay, so then on the Blu-ray front, two random local finds that were actually super cheap. I picked up the it's from ITV, but I believe this was actually pressed by let's see, yeah, Timeless. So I think this is technically a Shout Factory release. But I picked up the Blu-ray of Voyage of the Damned, which is sort of, it's essentially a big all-star cast film set in and around the era of World War II and the Holocaust. Sort of Murder on the Orient Express vibes, because it is coming out in the late 70s after the big all-star Christie adaptations. And I've only seen part of this before, so I was very surprised to just find it in the local store Blu-ray bins. So I'll check this out, and finally watched it all the way through. It includes a DVD copy, and I don't think this has any extras, so it's pretty much just the film, and it is pretty long. It's 160 minutes, so should be an interesting watch. And then last but not least, chipping away at my giant backlog of Criterion titles I should have picked up a long time ago. But if we all could do that, we'd all be millionaires, right? So they also had a used but super minty copy of Spine 733, the Blu-ray of La Dolce Vita, which I was like, wow, man, somebody in this state bought La Dolce Vita. I can't believe it. And then decided they didn't need it in their lives. Okay, yeah, I'll take it. So yeah, super minty. This is the Criterion release from the 4K restoration, with a super thick booklet and a really nice overlay. So, and of course, in the modern Criterion clear keep case, so it all matches on the shelf. So yeah, this was super cheap. So definitely glad I didn't pick this up at Barnes & Noble during the sale this year, because this was like, half the price of the sale price. Then on CD, let's see. These were all from the sub-dollar bin. These were all, pretty much like 25 cents to 99 cents. So this one I picked up out of curiosity. This one was just literally like a quarter. I have the original CD pressing from the Laserdisc box set, and then La La Land did a big 2 CD complete score release in the past year or two that I would really like to pick up, but their releases are expensive. So this is the 2004 extended version of John Barry's score for Dances with Wolves. Still has the original hype sticker on it. Same cover as the original CD I have that's in the extended Laserdisc box, but it has pretty nice art on it. And it is expanded. So, it is, it's not just expanded, it's got bonus tracks as well. So this is definitely something I will listen through and compare it to the original CD. And eventually one day I will hopefully get the La La Land complete release before it goes out of print. But, stuff like this pops up for a quarter or less. You kind of just have to say, sure, I'll get it for, if only for comparison's sake. And you have the lovely shot of Costner with the flag that was used on some of the anniversary Blu-ray covers. So again, it's amazing what you can find in CD bins these days. And also in some of the same bins, I've never really listened to much of Springsteen's career after the main run of famous 70s albums, 70s and 80s albums. So I've always kind of been lacking in that regard. So I found all three of these for literally dirt cheap, and one of them was still sealed. So one of them had never been opened. So these are the concurrently released albums from, I believe, 92. Yeah, 92. So these were released at the same time, I think on the same day back in 92. But this is Human Touch and Lucky Town. So, and again, full albums, perfect condition, less than $1. So I was like, sure. And again, this one was actually still sealed, never been opened. So I will dig into these along with this one I've wanted to listen to for a long time, simply because I love the title. But I know this one is very well regarded. But this is Ghost of Tom Joad, another Springsteen solo record from, I believe, from 95. Yeah, 95. So again, all three of these were just sitting in the cheap dump bins of CDs. So I was like, sure, this is going to come with me. And then, let's see. Ready? Alrighty, so I thought I would be done, but I'm not quite done. So I found out recently Barnes and Noble is doing a big blowout sale of 50% off a lot of titles. And if you go in the stores, it's like random tables full of books half off. But oh, hang on a second. Sorry about that. My dog decided he was just going to get himself tangled while I was streaming. They don't teach you how to do live streaming and make sure your dog doesn't get into mischief while you stream. Anyway, long story short, Barnes and Noble is doing a huge blowout on vinyl. So if you go in their stores and it's store dependent, so you have to look for LPs that are tagged, and all of them are tagged 50% off. So if you're looking for any releases in particular, take a stop by because the savings are huge. Because a lot of this stuff does not go on sale like that. So I went through the local store, dug through stuff, picked up a lot of stuff, put a lot of stuff back because I did not need to spend a whole lot of money. But I'm definitely going to check out some of the other local stores because it's just random what they have in there. So one of these was a blind buy because it was literally dirt cheap. So I picked up the Saint Cecilia Foo Fighters EP from a couple years back because it's an EP and it was half off. This was literally $5, brand new. So I know it's just an EP, but I've heard this is better than some of their later albums, which are really I didn't think were very good. But you know, I'll give anything, a shot every once in a while. And I love some of the, earlier Foo Fighter stuff. And every once in a while, they can really surprise you and do something, actually pretty darn good. And some of their vinyl releases sound really exceptional. Some not so much, but again, it was literally $5. So I was like, well, okay, that's cheaper than what it goes for on eBay even. And this one I had wanted to pick up. I just had never gotten around to it. And this one's actually on 180 gram heavyweight colored vinyl, which I'm not big on colored vinyl, but this actually looks pretty darn cool. So I'll pull it out in just a second. But I picked up the Prophets of Rage album. I really love the main three Rage Against the Machine albums and had not gotten to listen to this album much outside of some of the samples on YouTube and other places back when it came out. So I'm interested to check out this. And of course, the mastering on this LP version should be a lot better than the super loud modern digital recordings. But the reason why I went ahead and picked this up, this is actually, like I said before, it is a full-on, it's actually 180 gram. Seems to be pressed pretty well, but it's a translucent red with it's listed as like red with black overtones. I don't know how well you can see that, but there's actually black inside the grooves there, and it's fully translucent. So it's definitely a nice LP in terms of if you were going to do something colored, it's not just the usual colored vinyl junk, not pressed very well. And like I said before, it's actually 180 grams, so it's got some weight to it. So this will be interesting. I'll finally get to hear this without the lovely YouTube sounds. But again, these were all half off, so they're all well below list price and what they go for on eBay and used record bins and stuff. So, and a lot of these are just, it's limited to what's in the actual store. So I know if I go a week later, it's probably not going to be there. Now this is this third one is the last one I picked up. This is another one I had meant to pick up. It's not an expensive record, but this is actually a Barnes & Noble store edition. So it's got an autographed print inside of it. And this one, I don't think the standard release is like this. I may be wrong, but I didn't realize this was an actual really nice tri-pack. So I picked up the. They have a new album now, but this was their first album in years. I picked up the 2015 album "No Cities to Love," Slater Kinney's. I guess technically their comeback album because it was their first album in 10 years. But like I said, this is actually the special store Barnes and Noble edition. So with the mic out of the way. So like I said, I didn't realize this was a full-on tri-pack, and the printing in here is really, really good. And it's not an expensive record to begin with. It's they're still on the Sub Pop label and everything. But see if I can get this to where you can actually see this. Oh. So you have all three members here, and again, the printing is really exceptional, especially for what is normally a cheap vinyl release. But this being half off, it was the special store limited edition for less than $10, like more like $8. So I was like, okay. But here is what you get inside. This is the autographed print inside, so you get all three band members' autographs, which is a pretty cool touch. Sometimes Barnes and Noble does this on their store exclusives. It's just autographed, and usually it's on the jacket. But it's pretty cool they went this far. And again, I think this packaging, like the actual fold out, I don't know if the standard release is like that. Again, not a super expensive release to begin with, but it's cool that even the Barnes and Noble exclusive editions and colored vinyl editions and stuff like that are in this 50% off sale. So if you're collecting records these days, definitely go check it out. There's no telling what's actually out there in the store on the racks, but as long as it has that magical 50% off sticker on there in a Barnes and Noble, it is yours for half price. So definitely go check it out. And it's not just vinyl, it's books too, but the books are much more limited to what's on this like random table displays. So definitely stop by and just like kind of wander around the stores. And I don't know if it's because there's been all the talk about Barnes and Noble being bought out and facing bankruptcy and all that stuff, and I hope it wouldn't be. Maybe it's just an attempt to drum up sales or cut back on inventory and stuff. So, but yeah, definitely check it out because there's a ton of savings out there right now. So, with that being said, I think that does it for, that pretty much does it for pickups this week. Get this out of the way. Oh, cool. Alrighty. So, got a bunch of comments. Let me catch up on some of these really fast. Wolfgrat's talking about Carrie. Yeah, it's it is an interesting picture. I haven't seen it in ages, so I'm excited to rewatch it. I know I rented it on DVD years and years ago, and it was really funny. It used to be stocked in a lot of video stores, and I know most people rented it because they thought it was the Brian De Palma Carrie adaptation, and they put it in, and they got William Wyler's picture of Carrie from 1952 with Larry Olivier and Jennifer Jones, and they were very confused if they stuck with it. I know that's why it was in video stores because I remember seeing it all the time, and it must have just been like a system error or something, and they would always stock the 1952 Carrie. I guess they thought it was a 1952 version of the Stephen King novel or something. But I always associate it with that because I remember that always happened, and I always saw the DVD. I think the VHS tape as well. I always remember seeing it in video stores and it looking like it was always rented and then angrily returned because it didn't have a scene where a character got covered in pig's blood, Wolf likes the Plainsman too. Yeah. Yeah, although Jean Arthur's an unusual Calamity Jane. Yeah, that was the whole reason why I watched it in the first place. The fact that it was Jean Arthur in a Western as Calamity Jane. I'm like, okay, I have to see this. Plus, as Gary Cooper. Okay. But yeah, it's very hit or miss with DeMille films. For me, especially, like stuff like The Plainsman, I can get through, but it's still, you can tell DeMille made it. It's a little too long. fortunately, it's not when he started making stuff super preachy. But yeah, the later stuff I really can't do. Outside of like watching the Ten Commandments every once in a particular blue moon, it's like, yeah, Billy Wilder was right when he said that if you want to learn how to not make a movie, watch DeMille. Which is one of the great snarky comments of Hollywood. Let's see. Brian loves the Hoppy series. Yeah, I'm just stockpiling and going through any classic Western I can see, whether it's film or television. I'll just do it because I'm just like determined to be more broadened in my Western landscapes. Let's see. Oh, Pete's still talking about the Star Wars mixes, talking about, that nothing compares to the original Dolby 70 mil. I mean, in terms of the original mixes in technical terms, yes, because the 70 mil Dolby system they invented did have the ability to send the low frequencies to the baby boom cabinets, as they were called, by using the extra speakers and the 5 channels behind the screen, the left, center, and right center that weren't used. Because they were just using left, center, right. So that added to the overall effect of all the low end in the film because it was actually being reinforced properly, technically, for the first time. No one had ever done that before. Sort of prefiguring the subwoofer and the modern environment. That's where the whole notion came from for the point 1. And later Dolby refined that into a more refined version of the 70 millimeter system by the time you got to Apocalypse Now 2 years later and further on into the 80s. But in terms of differences, it's basically the same mix as the Dolby Stereo, but it's discrete. So you don't have the matrixing causing any loss of information. It's discrete channel usage and the low frequency enhancement. Which of course would be different to, I should mention, of course, the first time low frequency enhancement was really used was during the Sensurround days on the 4 main Sensurround titles. But that's a whole different beast altogether. That required special setup, whereas the Dolby system really didn't outside of the decoding equipment. It could work in a conventional 70 millimeter theater that was already set up for the old school Todd AO system of 5 channels behind the screen, and then your extra channels running through the back hall. But in terms of the itself, it's the same as the Dolby Stereo so far as we know, because all we're able to do is approximate or use. It's reputed that the 93 definitive Laserdisc mix is based off of the 70 millimeter tracks. So a lot of the fan recreations have worked from that, with a lot of fill-ins and alterations and fixes to try to patch out the additions and tweaks they made back in 93. So a lot of work has gone into that, particularly, I should say actually almost single-handedly by the member Harry Henn on originaltrilogy.com. And if you're really curious about his work, he's gone into more detail on the history and the design of that particular mix than anybody has. So the most information is in his thread on the reconstruction and his various versions of trying to reconstruct it. But yeah, basically, in layman's terms, the Dolby Stereo and the 70 mil are the same basic 4-channel original mix track. Left, center, right, single mono surround. But the 70 millimeter mix didn't have to go through the matrixing process, and it was still discrete, and it had the low frequency enhancement because they just fed the low end to those extra 2 speaker cabinets behind the screen that weren't being used. So they're like, well, we got these things. What do we use them for? I don't know. Make them go boom, I guess. I know it was much more well thought out than that, but just to give you an idea, that's why they're different. But when you actually get down and look at it, as far as we know, they're technically the same. Yeah, for everybody that saw Star Wars in 70 mil, really lucky. Or those people who saw that unused print that was just shown the one time over the AFI, last year, and I found out about it right after it happened. Otherwise, I would have bought a ticket to California that instant and reserved a ticket. And they just showed it like it was a regular movie, and they were like, why did we sell out in like 10 seconds?" And I'm like, "Oh, really?" First official sanctioned screening since, before 1997. I wonder why you sold out in 10 seconds. Maybe you should, I don't know, book more showtimes. um, I think also people were lucky who saw Close Encounters in 70. That's talked about on the Hoffman boards and a lot of other places. A lot of people swear it's never sounded as good, that they mixed in a lot of low bass specifically for the 70 millimeter experience, and Dolby, and particularly the final mothership landing has never sounded the same, especially when the special edition came out. People said they remixed the sound and they took a lot of the bass out. So that would be another one where it's always been a question of mine. Do any of the home mixes really stack up? It's said the collector's edition Laserdisc 5.1 is mixed from the 70 millimeter source. So I think it's like how that's said about the Star Wars definitive Laserdisc, but there's no way of knowing without actually being able to see the 70 millimeter source track yourself, or actually see it projected somewhere. But that's another one where it's rumored the original 70 mil release was a lot more bass heavy and impactful than any successive version. So hopefully that was a concise enough answer. Wolf's talking about totally branching out into just full on classic westerns. Yeah, I really would love to see more of the Harry Carey senior westerns because they're so important, and he was a huge, figure to practically everybody. And of course, most of his early westerns are, John Ford films, and they had a really long-standing collaboration. And unfortunately, almost all of those films are lost. So I really want to see the handful that have survived. Um, and actually, I think one or two of them were just recently discovered in the past 5 or 10 years. So I don't know if they're really available anywhere, but there are at least a couple of those that are, you know, actually in existence. Like there's a copy of it somewhere. Um, oh, Brian picked up the T2 CAV box, the apartment, and Shop Around the Corner. Oh, fantastic! Yeah, yeah. Once you get either T2 box, but especially that, um, honestly, I really like both of them. The CAV one is a lot harder to find now, the theatrical cut box, and honestly, it does look a bit better in picture quality than the extended cut box. But yeah, once you have both of those sitting on the shelf, it's like, oh yeah, it's serious now. I have an addiction, but they're great, and I can pull them out and just be like, yeah. And the people are like, what the heck is that? And I'm like, this is how a movie used to be. This is in a leather box with a metal plate. Oh, look, it's Arnold's head on fire. What do you have? iTunes? It doesn't. No, that's different. No. um, but yeah, I still love the apartment and Shop on Laserdisc. I actually got to see a print of the Shop Around the Corner. The art house did it, or local art house did it for the Christmas holiday season. And when you watch the Laserdisc, there's one specific point where there's a tiny little jump where it's missing a frame or two. It's very minor, but if you see the same print I did, it's got that same jump. So it must have been mastered from the same source. And the Laserdisc has a pretty nice. It's not a newsreel, but it's one of those old school short features they would show. And it's actually pretty long. It's about 20 minutes. So you get a nice 20-minute bonus that's not really advertised of a really old school, late 30s, early 40s MGM short subject film. And you could never go wrong with watching either The Apartment or Shop Around the Corner enough times. In Australia, there's only one theater in the whole country that plays Star Wars in 70 mil. Special Hoyts Theater in Sydney. Probably because they would have had to set up the Dolby equipment, and Star Wars was not supposed to be a big movie. So a lot of 70 houses booked it in as like filler because they were waiting for Sorcerer, and Sorcerer was going to be the big movie of '77, and then Star Wars became a runaway success out of nowhere. So then people had to book it, and they had to make more prints, and or had to wait until they got it for the general run and the mono prints and stuff. So the 70 all the prints got pretty warm because Star Wars was held over and continuously run for about 2 years, at least here in the US. But yeah, I can imagine in Australia, the only having one place that would figure. But I'm sure if you look it up for Empire, it was significantly more, and Jedi. And when 70 millimeter really took off post Star Wars as like the premier system, it's a lot like how IMAX has gotten bigger and bigger over the years, and now an IMAX release is just like, it's IMAX. I've seen that. 70 millimeter was very similar to that in terms of being used for conventional movies in the 70s into the 80s. By the late 80s, 70 millimeter was a lot more commonplace, and all your big tentpole films of the 80s would usually get a 70 mil print made somewhere. But then again, it might not. The studios could be cheap, or they didn't feel like they were going to make much money out of it, or they didn't want to pay for a print or the ads or the theater, or which is what I'm sure happened on the Bond films, because practically none of them got blow up prints outside of Octopussy randomly in '83. And then it's reputed that several others did. Moonraker probably did get 70 blow up prints. It's rumored You Only Live Twice and or Thunderball may have gotten blow up prints, but that's not confirmed because the whole Bond release theatrical history is very kind of spotty in terms of alternate versions being out there that are just not discussed or documented well. But yeah, by the early to mid 80s, 70 millimeter was much more of a big established thing. And it really didn't get killed off until it was really digital sound for conventional theaters is what did it, because that got rid of the premium sound selling point of 70 millimeter. The fact you could get discrete digital multi-channel audio off of a 35 millimeter print, which was by that time, the early 90s, 35 printing had gotten so much better that the difference between well-mastered 35 and well-mastered 70 was much less and cost less. So then they were like, well, we don't need to do this anymore. So yeah. So if you could time travel, show up in Sydney in 77. Video connoisseur. Hey man, how's it going? Oh, cool. You just got the Technodisc of Star Wars. Fantastic. That is not an easy feat and to track one down, and especially since I've talked about it a lot. The OT forums are all full of it, and then Culture Dog did a video on it. So now there have been some eBay listings where people put Technodisc on there and think they can jack up the price, and half the time it's not even a Technodisc copy. It's like sometimes it's even a shrinking ratio one. But yeah, once you find one, that's like that is a real LD badge of honor, if you will. And it really is noticeably better, even on a CRT. If you compare it to the shrinking one, or I think it's better than the JSC, but that's just me. Your results may vary, but it's a lovely pressing. I think it's the best official release to own, because of all of the problems and things that have happened in the interim. But that's the one I will always pull out and show people if they want to watch a Laserdisc version of Star Wars, or they want to see what LD can do on a, on just a regular disc that's not a special edition or box set or CAV or something. And then I put it in. I'm like, oh, by the way, this is the best official release of Star Wars, just so you know. And they're like, what? So yeah, congratulations, sir. Okay, cool. Garrick's talking about Thin Man, so that will help me transition over to the actual topic I'm supposed to be talking about. So yeah, to briefly mention, I'll talk more about it later when I talk about the video releases, but the 2019 recent release of the original Thin Man by Warner Archive. This is a stunner of a disc. It's astonishing what they were able to do, because they've had a real problem trying to get elements for it. They've said they had to spend a few years piecing together elements after searching everywhere, trying to make a good 4K scan of something to make it presentable. So that's why this release is super important, and I think it's sold pretty well. So hopefully that will bode well for them doing the sequels, because they're pretty good about that. It's like they have to convince the powers be at Warner Brothers that, they put one thing out and it sells well enough, and then they do another. But then again, on the flip side, they may just do the whole series if this sells well enough. They did Mask of the Phantasm; it sold out, so Warner Brothers actually went and did the whole Batman animated series. They did Teen Titans season 1, got to do the whole series. And then instead of just doing one, they just did both Shaft sequels, so you can get all 3 of the original Shaft films on Blu-ray. So it's definitely possible that they might do the other 5, and I really hope they do, because I think they're all great. But yeah, this thing is amazing. This also is one of the best discs of 2019, not talked about enough, because most people don't know how difficult it is to restore certain films like this, where the elements are a real problem. And I think that's why the DVDs were never really upgraded over the Laserdisc, because they just didn't have the money and they didn't have anything to, scan over again. So to transition into talking about these a bit, I think it's important to do a little bit of background. So The Thin Man, as I alluded to before, is a series of mystery films. They do have comic overtones, but they're still whodunit mysteries about a think of the best way to describe them. The married couple of Nick and Nora Charles, who are the most amazing, bantering, witty, funny, completely gin and all other forms of alcohol soaked dueling sleuths you will ever encounter, who happen to solve crimes and do so in style with their pet dog Asta. It all started when Dashiell Hammett wrote the novel entitled The Thin Man, written in 1933-34. This is technically, as far as I understand, this is actually the last full-length novel he actually had published in his lifetime. He had various other short stories and other things that were not published in novel form until years later, and in anthologies pretty recently. This is where the concept was created, and it was based primarily around his own relationship with, I believe she was a playwright named Lillian Hellman, but they sort of had this witty repartee back and forth. And of course, Hammett himself was a former detective. He was a Pinkerton agent. So he had all of the world experience that his fictional character, Nick Charles, would have had as a former renowned detective. And so in the novel, you have basically the setup of the film, and the whole film series, where the couple of Nick and Nora Charles, she's a wealthy socialite, and he's married her and retired, and basically kind of manages her money, and they just go around to parties and drink until oblivion. And then they always somehow manage to have business find them, if you will. There's always a murder and a body somewhere. The book is actually a nice read if you've ever read a lot of Hammett. He has a very direct style. I do think he is one of the important writers of the 20th century, so I don't think there are any unimportant Hammett works. And it's interesting, this was his last full-length novel. So this was actually written after the Continental Op books and Red Harvest, and especially the Maltese Falcon, which is his masterpiece. This is interesting because it does have that sort of comic flavor in it. But of course, it is much darker than what an MGM film could be. But I would argue the first 2 films of the series do maintain the flavor of Hammett, and he did indeed contribute ideas to the first couple of films. And of course, those were used here and there, but after a point, he just kind of got fed up, because they just kind of started to do their own thing and make them much more MGM cookie cutter films. Although they're not like the super clean and everything's perfect Andy Hardy films and stuff like that. And not that there's anything wrong with stuff like that, but if you watch all the films in order, they're much like the Tarzan films, which also ran concurrently, where the first two are pre-code and very dark and have these risque elements, and then over time you see them become a bit whitewashed, and the risqueness goes, and the everything else gets dialed back. They're still great, they're still classics, but they don't have that edge of the first ones. So anyway, everything starts with Hammett's novel of The Thin Man, and I do recommend this along with all the other Hammett novels if you haven't read it. But if you're only used to the films, the book will be a real curveball for you, because it is definitely a bit darker. It's of course relatively thick. It's a full length novel, so there's more stuff going on here, but it gives the genesis and the setup for the characters of Nick and Nora Charles and the world that they come from. And it's really great that Hammett was able to draw on all of his personal life experiences and this own dynamic he had in his real life. And so he basically cast himself in sort of a semi-idealized mold as this character he came up with. So it's basically like what he would like to have seen himself as, is a way you could kind of take this. So Thin Man, written and released in 1933. MGM basically gets a hold of the rights and decides to make a film version out of it in the middle of the Depression. And this is still in the pre-code era, so they were able to maintain more of the dark aspects of the book. And the book, although it is a lighter in tone book than say Red Harvest or other Hammett books, it's definitely right out of the hard-boiled school of crime fiction and pulp writing that had come out of magazines and the pulps like Black Mask, where Hammett and Chandler and everybody else had gotten their first stories published. So it's still very much in that vein. So it does have that grittiness to it that does make it makes for a really nice juxtaposition with the fact that these characters are moving through high society, and the fact that Nora is a rich socialite and Nick is a famous detective, but still technically a man of the street. And there are so many great scenes in the film series where they encounter each other's friends. And there's a great line in the second film where Nora just turns to Nick and is like, "Darling, you have the most interesting friends." But anyway, so MGM came around to setting up the original film. And of course, this was not intended to be a series or anything. It was just a one-off. And a lot of adaptations of hard-boiled fiction didn't really go over well the first time around. Most famously, The Maltese Falcon was made twice before the famous 1941 John Huston masterpiece, because they really didn't know how to hack it. The first version was the 1931 pre-code version over at Warner Brothers, also titled The Maltese Falcon, which has really nice dark elements. It's definitely a pre-code film. It has a lot of the risqueness we associate with pre-1934 pre-code talkies, but it does deviate quite a bit from Hammett's novel, and it's a good film, but it's not technically the book, and it's not great. So then 5 years later, they tried again in 1936 by making Satan Met a Lady, and they turned it into a comedy with Bette Davis, and it's wacky and weird and doesn't really work because they didn't go and simply do the book. But that was over at Warner Brothers, and that's the most famous example. But that really did happen for a lot of works. There were other works that were bought, and the code came in and was really enforced starting in 1934. So a lot of these things studios had bought, they suddenly couldn't use because the code would forbid it, especially the James Cain novels, particularly Postman Always Rings Twice and Double Indemnity, both of which were not made until the 1940s with heavy revisions. Double Indemnity less so. But they still had to find ways to work things through the production code, but they also had to wait until it was way later, because there were certain works like that the production code literally said, specifically naming certain titles, you cannot do these. Literally, we won't allow them. So you had that problem come in as well. But it did take studios a while to figure out how to adapt these classic, what are now classic works of the emerging school of hard-boiled detective and crime fiction. And they could either fit in as a straight-ahead gangster picture or a detective picture, and there was no real leeway, so they would like try and shoehorn it in that, or turn it into a comedy or something. So in determining how they were going to do the cast, what happened was actually pretty interesting. They had the dream team iconic pair inadvertently become created by accident, and that happened when William Powell and Myrna Loy were cast in a film together as co-leads, and that was the 1934 film Manhattan Melodrama with Clark Gable. And it's technically a Gable vehicle, but it's really interesting to see because it's still a pretty good film, actually, and all three lead performances are great. But you see for the first time Powell and Loy, on screen together, and the way they spark off of each other. And you can even see it this first time, and it's so iconic and such a potent on-screen connection that they did. That was their first film, but they did a combined total of 14 films with each other in leading roles, and of course 6 of them being the 6 Thin Man films. But pretty much right off the bat, MGM knew that they had something with this pairing, and although neither of them were the lead was of course Clark Gable as the charming gangster character. Although the plot setup is a little bit silly, the fact that the gangster's best boyhood friend turns out to be the DA, and they decide to be honorable and still be friends. But if the gangster goes the wrong way, the DA is going to have to take him down. And then Clark Gable just sits there and is like, "Yep, I still love you. You're so darned high idealed. You're such a great guy. That's why you're better than me. All right, you can arrest me now." It's like, okay, it's a little hard to swallow, but it's still a good film. But that's where this screen team got developed, by just getting put together in a picture, and they just magically it was like they were drawn to one another on the screen, even though they were simply super great friends in real life. It got to such a point that both of them recounted how many times everybody, whenever they would have to do publicity tours, or go talk about a film or go promote it or something, anywhere they would go, especially when they were together, everybody thought they were actually really married. And they had such a hard time getting hotel accommodations because they would always get put into a bridal suite or a honeymoon suite, and they're like, "But we're not married. Like, we're really not married, guys. Like, those are just characters." And they're like, but of course you're married. You're perfect. Like, you're totally, like, joined at the hip." And they're like, "No." But that's how convincing the illusion of this is. And it all literally started in Manhattan Melodrama. And there were a couple other pictures in between, and all of these right at the same time, 1933, 1934, because the original Thin Man happened right smack dab in 1934. So, of course, there is the lovely Warner Blu-ray. But the primary way I watch these films, and I would actually recommend most people because it's the most affordable and easy to obtain way, is in the really lovely MGM UA Thin Man Collection Laserdisc box set. And because all 6 films are in here, it's one of the thicker ones where the top just kind of wants to spring off. But this is the first, I think, really good home video release. There are some earlier releases on Laserdisc with analog sound, but not all 6 were out until this box set came about. And then they didn't get reissued separately on Laserdisc, so this is the way to go. I'm sure that I do believe they're all available on tape. The DVD box set came around and pretty much used these masters anyway, and since that's now out of print and is rather pricey, this is still a pretty nice way to go, and you can usually get this whole set for about $10 or less, so it's very recommended. All have PCM mono tracks, and there are some of the surviving trailers included on here. So anyway, I'm gonna have to keep referring back to this because it's very hard to remember like I know the films, but the titles are so similar for these various sequels that it's hard to keep it straight in your head which title goes to which sequel in what order. The Tarzan films and all of the other MGM series have the same problem because it's hard to remember which Andy Hardy film Andy Hardy went and did what, because they're all Andy Hardy does something or Tarzan does something or something something of the Thin Man. Um, but anyway, so to talk about the original film, which is in the Library of Congress National Film Registry, it is, viewed as an iconic classic of the film medium. What makes it so important? First of all, you have the fact that it is very strongly based on Dashiell Hammett's source material. Of course, they have to condense it all into, the runtime of an early talkie. But because it is a pre-code film, even though it's 1934, those pre-code elements are still coming through. It basically made it right through right before the door slammed closed on what you could and couldn't do. So we are introduced in the first scene. It takes place in a hotel bar where they're already drinking and drinking very heavily. But we are introduced magically to the wonderful couple who come in one at a time, and the just constant banter and repartee that goes back and forth and never stops. And none of it is with a negative or mean streak or anything like that. And what makes that what that does is, I know I'm not the first to say this, and there are probably other examples, but what makes these films so special, and especially the first one in particular, is that this was the first time you really had, of course, I knocked everything over. The first time you really had a married couple on screen that seemed, much more vibrant and realistic, and promoting the idea that marriage didn't just simply mean the end of literally didn't mean the end of adventure, spirit, playfulness, let alone sexiness and vibrancy. That you had two people who are obviously committed to each other, but still, enjoying and finding the higher, finer points of life, even though they are completely opposite from one another and have completely different backgrounds. And her extended family obviously doesn't care one bit about him, and he doesn't care one bit about them. And it always makes you wonder what the story was for the film series of how exactly they met. You get little tiny slivers of their backstory and dialogue, particularly in the second film. But yeah, I would argue what really makes the first film special is this really deep relationship between the two characters, and the fact that it is still a pre-code film based on a Dashiell Hammett novel. So it is darker. There are deaths. There is rampant drinking like there's no tomorrow, almost to the point where if you were, it's like you're playing a drinking game. If you played a drinking game with this film, you would be dead by alcohol poisoning. It's beautifully ludicrous how much they drink and how much they're hungover after the Christmas parties and things. And of course, the banter back and forth is just, it's sublime. It just never ends. And again, it's all it's designed to come from characters who know every single innate secret of the other, and not just their faults, but the faults that those faults make them adore the other person even more. So the fact that it's such a richly textured central relationship, I think, is what gave it enough fuel to last for an entire series, and what really attracted the public in and made the public fall in love with this whole notion. And the fact that they do all of this and they travel through high society and all of the silliness that entails really spoke to Depression era audiences, because that was, for lack of a better term, that was an easy sale to Depression era audiences to show high society, something that was so far away from the common man who was struggling to find a job or standing in the breadlines and such, but also to, kind of play them for fools somewhat. So that way you could see the high life and then see all the silly people and find comic relief in that. And again, the dichotomy of her background and his background basically sort of make them like outsiders, even in this world of high society. They just kind of move through it, and they're like, outsiders looking in, just just commenting and reacting on just the silliness that goes on. And again, in the middle of all this, somehow, some way, there always happens to be a murder that happens, and Nick Charles steadfastly proclaims, "Nope, he is retired. He wants nothing to do with anything, and no amount of prodding or pleading or anything is going to get him back into it." And of course, Nora is like all game for it. Like, "Oh, I need action. Oh, of course, Nikki, you can do it. Why not? Nope, nope. I'm going to sleep and drink into oblivion." And the fun of the picture for the next couple of reels is, of course, he gets dragged into it because he's, of course, bored out of his mind. And they have so much fun doing this stuff. And he has fun. And you can tell trying to pretend like he doesn't want to solve a crime when obviously he can't not solve a crime if it's just put right in front of him, literally sometimes on a silver platter. Um, and of course, I would be remiss to not mention the other central character of the film, which, of course, shown here on the cover. And I think a little bit more notably, more notably here, the iconic Asta, their loyal terrier. Who is played by the same dog actor who is famously with Cary Grant and Irene Dunn in the iconic Awful Truth. So the fact that they do all this stuff and are just the most amazing, charming people ever and solving crimes and murders with a dog in tow. And Asta is one of the great movie dogs, and is just such an iconic presence in all of the films. Because very often, especially in classic Hollywood films, if an animal turns up, it was always don't work with children or animals, and don't watch a movie with children or animals because it's just going to be annoying cliches and dumb, stupid stuff. And Asta is never any of those, and it's wonderful and refreshing that they were able to cram in a dog character into these murder mysteries, and it still be fun and like a third person, even though it's not a person, it's a dog. So again, that's the charm of these films in a nutshell, and it's all in the original film. And again, I won't get into plot very much, because if I do, that kind of spoils the whole journey of these films. And especially, you can't talk about plot without talking about the murders and the suspects and the such. And especially the first time, it's a whodunit. You don't want to spoil it, and 90% of the fun is in the journey. And giving away any of these films does take that spirit out. But again, as I said before, the more you watch these, the more texture and nuance you find in them, and the more stuff that you miss the first time. I don't know. So the first film came out, and the other thing I should mention is that it was directed by the should be better known MGM house contract director, for lack of a better term, WS or Woody Van Dyke, also known as One Take Woody. One Take Woody because he would famously literally print a single take of certain scenes. He was, just about the fastest director on the MGM lot. And his whole work ethic was, work fast to maintain spontaneity and keep your actors fresh, and obviously don't rush through things, but he never wanted to lose spontaneity. So if he could get everything in a master shot in one take, he wouldn't worry about having close-ups and reaction shots and stuff, because he got it all there in one take. So that's sort of where the nickname came from. And the original Thin Man was made on a very short schedule, and in a very small amount of time, very small amount of days. A lot of the supporting characters have gone on record saying that they couldn't even tell what was up or down half the time because it moves so fast. But what that does is that gives the film an energy. That, combined with the central lead pairing of Powell and Loy, and the fact that it's still a pre-code film from 1934, all of those factors really are what make it so special. So, like I said before, you have the Hammett voice still in there. It hasn't been, obliterated like it would be later on. You have the central magic pairing of actor and actress of Powell and Loy, and you have this sort of I mean, it's not a manic energy, but it's a real force. Like it just constantly moves. And when you realize they made it in like, 12, 14 days, a lot of scenes were only shot, one take, unless there was a mistake or a flub or, the lab messed up and they had to go reshoot it or something. If they, it's like, let's get it down, let's get it done and move on because we don't have a lot of time. So all of those are, in the soup that, stew down into what make the original Thin Man so special and what made it such a hit with critics and audiences. Because MGM didn't think it was going to go anywhere. It was just this film. It didn't have major stars in it, but this was the film that made Bill Powell and Myrna Loy into major stars. And both of them had been around for, quite a long time, stretching back into the silent days. But they had already technically been typecast and at first were not had it not been for Manhattan Melodrama, they probably would not have been as strongly considered for the Thin Man, and there would have been other stars in the film and it wouldn't have been the same. But this was really it wasn't an A film from MGM. It was more of a B film technically in terms of the mentality of which they produced it. So I think that made them more willing to put Powell and Loy in the film because, like I said before, both of them had kind of been typecast at this point. Powell started out in silent films and wound up playing a lot of silent villains a lot of times, sometimes with the twirling mustache. And then he transitioned over into leading man roles. He'd done some detective roles. He also played Philo Vance in some films in that. So there were some precursors to him playing Nick Charles. Myrna Loy, on the other hand, had played a lot of female supporting leads. And then most interestingly, she got always cast as the ethnic types in several silent films and then a lot of early talkie films, most notably as the completely twisted and psychotic nymphomaniac daughter of Fu Manchu in Mask of Fu Manchu. She's Follow C in that film and is just absolute. It's a riot to see her go so completely over the top with Boris Karloff in that film. So if you can overlook the unfortunate yellow peril racism inherent to the Fu Manchu stories, there's a really wild film in there, and it's really hitting to see all of the crazy scenes that she has to do as that type of character she had been kind of forced into. So this again helped both really become leading stars of Hollywood and really cemented their image from this point onward as this type of role. So the original Thin Man came out, and again, massive success critically and with audiences. And so, of course, that means they wanted more. But, the notion of a sequel back then was definitely not something that, people were really going to be into in terms of studios. It wasn't the terms that they thought of. So they paired them in other films, films like The Great Ziegfeld, or again, they were in 14 films together overall throughout their career. So MGM paired them up several more times. But then, 2 years later, decided to finally do another Thin Man film. But before that, they paired them in one last film. I'm not sure if this came out before or after the first Thin Man sequel, but this one comes the closest in their pairings of it definitely feels like a Thin Man film, but it is a screwball comedy. And I would be remiss to not mention this because this is definitely the best non-Thin Man film that they're paired in. And I think it's one of the great screwball comedies, period. I think it's one of the most underrated for sure. So I have to mention it. And that's the 1936 MGM screwball comedy, Libeled Lady, with Powell and Loy, and then Jean Harlow and Spencer Tracy. And it's a definite straight up screwball comedy premise of a newspaper, prints a story about a rich heiress played by Myrna Loy, and it's of course untrue. So she sues them for $1 million, which of course they cannot pay. So then Spencer Tracy's editor character convinces the ex-newspaperman Bill Powell to participate in a scheme with Tracy's fiance, played by Jean Harlow, to try to set up the Myrna Loy character into, essentially defaming herself. And of course, it all goes completely wacky from there. But the setup alone is outstanding, and all four play off of each other beautifully. And it's really interesting to see Spencer Tracy do a full on comedic performance, because in this film, especially, you can see his insane, astounding natural comedic timing. And again, you have the Powell Loy pairing just as great as it is in the Thin Man films, but in a complete screwball comedy scenario. And the really interesting real life connection here is, of course, as I said before, everybody in the world thought Powell and Loy were actually married. But in this film, Powell and Loy, of course, are the love interest of either character. But in real life, William Powell was actually in a relationship with Jean Harlow, and had it not been for her untimely death shortly after this film, they would have actually been married. So it's a really strange film to see if you know the actual real life backstory of the actors and actresses. But again, I think this comes the closest to how the Thin Man films work and feel in terms of that central dynamic. And again, this is like seeing a Thin Man film that goes straight into screwball comedy. And all four leads are just fantastic. Again, I think this is one of the great screwball comedies, and supremely underrated, but definitely important to mention in the context of the Thin Man films, because it's the closest of their other pairings to a Thin Man film, and of course came out in the same year as the first Thin Man sequel, which is after the Thin Man. And again, the box is kind of shown out of order, so bear with me. And since I only have the Laserdisc box, I have to hold this big heavy thing up every time I reference one of these. The DVDs are a lot smaller, but yeah. This is what I've got currently. Now, I love all six films, but you can definitely tell a difference in terms of energy after the first two films. Again, I would associate this with the way that the MGM Tarzan films go. The first two films are the darker ones, the more adventurous, iconic ones, whereas after that, the sequels are all good, but your mileage may vary with the ones that you like, or how far you want to go with the later ones. It really depends on how much into the first two, I would argue. But I would also again say I think the second film is just as good as the first film, and I think it's not often recognized enough. Generally, I think it's kind of felt that the second film is up there with the first film, but this is one of those where I think there is one sequel that's as good as, if not better than, the original film. So I think after the Thin Man, although it's the second film, I think it should be regarded as highly as the first film. And of course, like all of the sequels, it follows the same sort of plot structure, where we find our heroes and pup, a couple years down the road, and they're, still madly in love with each other, but it's a couple years down the road. Some things have changed here and there. But somehow, some way, there's going to be a body somewhere. There's going to be a murder or a crime committed, and it's going to be a matter of, how do our sleuths put down the cocktails and somehow get, dragged into this, whether they like it or not. And what's great about After the Thin Man is that it doesn't simply repeat the plot of the first film. Like I said before, you always wondered in the first film what the backstory is of how Nick and Nora met, and how her family reacted to him, and vice versa. Well, you actually get to meet some of that family in the sequel, and the murder that happens is is someone who knows the family, so it's all within the family. So then there's an added element of, Nick is not liked by any of Nora's family, but they have to keep this thing quiet, so they prey upon his detective skills they've mocked for all these years, because they need this kept hush hush. So there's a whole fun element of the backstory you wondered about in the first film, you get in the second film. You get a great murder setup. You get a great host of suspects. And like the first film, it's filled with character actors. But I should have mentioned this with the first film, but I forgot to. What's great about some of these films, but particularly the first two, not only do you have great character actors who were at MGM at the time, but you also have great stars peppered in as well, both rising stars and established names. So in the original Thin Man, you also have Marino Sullivan in the film, and in After the Thin Man, it's one of the very first film appearances of one James Stewart, who actually gives a remarkable performance for a very early role. And again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's a must film for Jimmy Stewart fans, even though it's a very small part because all of the supporting parts are very small. It's only they only show up in specific scenes and when they're all gathered together and things like that. But it's important for that reason, and it gets usually left out on a lot of the films of Jimmy Stewart lists, which is unfortunate because it's really interesting to see him in 1936, pre Frank Capra and everything, when he was just another rising contract player at MGM. What's also great about the sequel, due to the success of the first film, they had more time and a lot more money to play around with. This time, you actually get to see, whereas the first film takes place primarily in apartments. In the sequel, you get to see Nick and Nora's, it's not quite a palatial mansion, but you get to see their actual house in California, and where Asta actually lives. And there's a whole great silent comedic subplot with Asta coming back home and finding that, shall we say, his lady friend has perhaps been having fun with other four-legged members of the neighborhood. So they even give Asta a fun subplot in the sequel. So yeah, it's just a wonderful film. It's ridiculously inventive, and it's got a lot more going on than the first film, and it has that same sort of ribald energy to it because it was also directed by Woody Van Dyke again. So it's basically one of the great film sequels that really does equal the original and improves upon the formula the original sets. So it stands, shoulder to shoulder with the original film. It's one of the great film sequels of Hollywood history for sure. Of course, it doesn't get mentioned like other sequels. You always hear Godfather Part 2 and Empire Strikes Back, but that list is headed by Bride of Frankenstein. After the Thin Man belongs on there. It's one of the 5 or 10 great film sequels that's as good as the original film. So it of course was released to great fanfare, great success. Everybody loved it and was so happy they finally got another Thin Man film. And critics enjoyed that they brought so much new to the concept and didn't just simply repeat the first film over and over. Now, the reason why they didn't immediately go and do a third film, unfortunately, was that it was really one of two things. First of all, Jean Harlow died, and that really affected Bill Powell, who also at the same time was diagnosed with cancer, which was really not a good thing to happen in the 1930s, where the treatment options were much more limited, to say the least. But he had a hiatus after this film in 1936, partially out of mourning for Jean Harlow, and then partially because he actually started undergoing what was at the time really an experimental treatment, but it was essentially an early form of radiation treatment. I believe it was radium back in the day, and that actually, as far as I know, his cancer was eliminated or fully in remission and such. So that's why there's such a big gap between films, between After the Thin Man and Another Thin Man, which didn't come out until 3 years later in 1939. And of course, most people have no idea, but if you watch these films in order, you'll notice, well, why did this one take 3 years? And why did they suddenly look like significantly older? Especially, why does Bill Powell look, a bit different? So it helps to understand that, that's what he went through physically in the interim. First extreme grief and loss, and then actually surviving cancer in the 1930s, which is just surviving cancer is never something easy to do, but especially think about, surviving cancer when that was not even a commonly known, term, and there were no real treatment options for it at the time. And the fact that he not only survived and overcame it, but, managed to go back to his career and maintain it for, a few more decades is just, that's work ethic for you. Um, so anyway, that leads to another Thin Man, which was released in 1939. Of course, this is well after the production code, and while after the Thin Man came out, 2 years after the code got enforced, it definitely has some feeling of pre-code into it. And I think they kind of let some things go past because they knew it was not a film trying to be risque or super violent and stuff. And of course, everybody knew the first film by that point in time. So I think the production code was maybe a bit more lenient here and there on letting some of the unsaid words and witticisms kind of slip past what would normally get blocked out. Again, I make a lot of parallels to the Tarzan series, but if you look at the MGM Tarzans with Johnny Weissmuller, there are a lot of similarities to the way that series went compared to the Thin Man films. So both series had a delayed entry come out in 1939. In the Tarzan world, that was Tarzan Finds His Son, which you'll notice both in that film and in this film, it's definitely much more. It's much more family friendly, for lack of a better term, but not in so much a bad way, but in the fact that the pre-code elements have pretty much been much more stamped out by this point. Of course, it's a couple years down the road. Our happy couple is older, wiser, bit more established, and by this point in time have another member of the family arriving, as indicated by some of the later images. There is a son that arrives mid-series, just like the Tarzan films, of course, because how do you clean up something that was violent and dirty and adult? Well, give him a kid, of course. That's what you do in 1939. So that's what MGM did twice in both the Tarzan series and the Thin Man films. But anyway, another Thin Man is a good film. It's a solid film, but it's the one where the mystery itself can kind of be confusing, and it's where it seems like the plot kind of gets bogged down here and there, and it doesn't have the full free flowing elements of the first two films. Again, none of the later four sequels are bad. I think they're all good films. They're all worth watching and rewatching over and over for Powell and Lloyd being so magical on screen together. But you can definitely notice in Another Thin Man how they're trying to figure out stuff to do, and by this point in time, they were pretty much ignoring all of what Dashiell Hammett was trying to contribute. So that Hammett, as I said before, got fed up, and basically it was finally found in some of his collections not too long ago, some of his abandoned Thin Man ideas, and those were later published as a book, I believe, called Return of the Thin Man. So you can actually go and read some of his unused story contributions for film sequels. So really by this point in time, they were kind of doing away with even Hammett's input. He did have a little bit of input, if I'm understanding correctly, on the next film, Shadow of the Thin Man, but that was really the last one to have anything to do with him. They were pretty much just trying to use him as a selling point by putting his name on the poster, like input from Dashiell Hammett, acting like he wrote it when he clearly did not. So Another Thin Man is definitely much more of a studio film, but again, it's not bad at all. It's got some really great set pieces, and again, the central pairing is as magic as ever. It was also directed by Woody Van Dyke as well, who directed all of the first four films before his death in the 1940s. So, it does have some of the drive and the speed of the first two films, but again, it's 1939. It's a bit slower. It's a bit more sedate in its pacing. So you can definitely see that, things are shifting away from the way the first two films played everything. But again, it's not bad. It's just different. And it's important and helpful to understand why all this stuff happened. And of course, it had been 3 years since the previous film. And, So again, it's really one that might throw people if they're coming to this series for the first time, but I would definitely say stick with it. I think all six films are great, and but it's really the first two that are the ones that are the iconic classics, and then again, how much you love those will kind of inform what you like and maybe dislike in the other four. So Another Thin Man was relatively successful, and again, everybody was just kind of happy that they made another one, but it didn't have the same massive success and reception of the first two. And critics of the time also kind of picked up on what I was talking about. That it they would all say it kind of felt a little bit tired, like the formula was kind of wearing thin here and there. Um, I can see that there is maybe some tiredness to it, especially if you watch all of these in succession and you watch them in order. Um, but again, that's going to happen with anything, and it's important to see what they then how the studio reacted to that. So the next film in the series came along in 1941, which is Shadow of the Thin Man. Of course, again, this is the last film that had anything to do with Dashiell Hammett, but he was pretty much by this point being used for name purposes only. So, where Another Thin Man basically revolved around a murder that happens at a country estate, Shadow of the Thin Man revolves around a murder that happens to take place at a racetrack while Nick and Nora are at a racetrack just for, fun, I guess. um, so that's the setting and vibe of Shadow. And I would argue that Shadow of the Thin Man is, even more of a studio film. There are some scenes with their son, who is, of course, an infant or baby in Another Thin Man, but by Shadow is not really a precocious toddler, but kids can be very hit or miss in classic Hollywood films. Sometimes they can be considered very annoying, especially to modern audiences, or sometimes they're just nothing but cliches. But thankfully, that doesn't happen in this film. There's actually a really extraordinarily cute scene with Nick and his son in the very opening of the film, and then the son character is really used very sparingly. So actually, I think Shadow of the Thin Man, even though it is much more of a typical, detective, just solve the crime movie, that just happened to have the Thin Man characters in it. Because it is different than the previous film, I think it that helps it play over, play with audiences a bit better. But it is much more of a, just standard, whodunit in terms of a film. But again, all of these are still good, solid films, all four of these sequels. Now we come to the next film, which actually was released quite a bit later in 1945. That's The Thin Man Goes Home. And this is the real point of departure. I know some people really don't like this film, and some people like myself actually really love it because it's so different. So, how I was talking about Shadow of the Thin Man being much more of a studio film, well, Thin Man Goes Home is like even further, because it totally departs from the formula at first. Whereas we got more of Nora's family in the second film. We've always wondered, well, what's Nick's family like? That's in the novel a bit, but they do away with that and create this whole new backstory for Nick's character. And so the title literally indicates what the film does. And they basically go back to his hometown. And for being such a wise man of the streets and such a great detective, you would think, he grew up in the Bronx or something. And the great conceit of the film is that they allude to him basically growing up in the greatest, most amazing, stereotypical small town American little town ever, with the super nice townspeople who know everybody by their first name, and the mom who cooks pie all the time and is the nicest person in the history of ever, and all that stuff, all the stereotypes, everything, almost as if he grew up in the fictional Mandrake Falls of Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, or if he grew up in Bedford Falls from It's a Wonderful Life. And of course, Nora is just totally like, what? And to Nick Charles, it's absolutely hell on earth. So that's where comedy comes from. And it's extraordinarily well done. And even though it's basically like walking into a living cliche, it's hysterical for the fact that this is actually the environment that supposedly produced the world's greatest street smart detective, and he can't stand it. And he's just embarrassed and flustered the whole time. And of course, his wife is loving every second of it. Um, and there's a nice little subplot with Nick and his father not getting on very well, and there being a whole unspoken a disconnection between them. Almost in a lot of ways, it is reminiscent of what turns up in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I don't know if Spielberg or Lucas were aware of this film. I'm sure Spielberg was, probably in the back of his mind somewhere. But that's sort of the older disciplinarian, disconnected father who disapproves of what his worldly son does. It just reeks of Last Crusade vibes. So it's interesting that in the middle of a living cliche where everything's great, you have that as well. So there's extra fuel to the fire. So that's the setup of the film. And of course, a murder happens and there's a body. And of course, that's kind of strange to happen in such a great small town. But so it's still a Thin Man film. So it's totally different from any of the four films before it, and that makes it play so well. It would have been very easy for it to not be as good as it is, but I think the real key to this film, of course, by this point in time, they'd lost the original director. Woody Van Dyke had died by this point, but I think the real key is that the screenplay was co-written by Robert Riskin, who wrote many of the great Capra films and was the key element to Capra's success in the 1930s films. So my reference to Mr. Deeds Goes to Town and Mandrake Falls, that's exactly, because that Robert Riskin wrote all that, so, you don't even realize that at first, but then when you actually read the credits, it's like, oh, holy crap. Well, no wonder it's got more, brain cells to what should just be a dumb cliche. It was the guy who wrote Mr. Deeds wrote Thin Man Goes Home. So it's a real surprise. It was the real surprise of the series for me. And again, it kind of gets a mixed reception for most people because it's not what you're led to expect after the four films that preceded it. But it's a really interesting film. I really love it. But again, it's going to cause opinions to polarize a bit on what people feel because it's totally different. But like all of the films, you have the central three characters: man, woman, dog. So there's still that constant. So we get to this point in the mid 1940s, and at any point in time, this series could have ended, and each one, of course, came out with less and less fanfare, made less money at the box office. There's more competition, so it's a surprise, really, that Thin Man Goes Home got a good reception, and of course, obviously made enough money to generate a sequel, which was the final film in the series, Song of the Thin Man, which is, of course, several years down the road in the late 1940s. And our characters are, of course, much older. So if you went right from the first film to the last film, you would definitely notice the difference. But it's nice just to see them go for, one more go round. But it's definitely the weakest film of the six. But again, it's really more of like just a farewell to these characters that we've grown to, love and admire through the previous five films and the novel. But it's interesting to see them in much more of a 1950s feeling film. It's all taking place in the, musical jazz world of the big cities, and that's where the murder takes place. And all of the side characters are either band leaders or musicians. And so that's the whole backdrop of the final film. And it looks and feels much more like a, early 50s film because it's, being made in the late 40s. Early 50s era anyway. So it definitely is the one that has the least, I'm trying to think of the right word. Its identity as a standalone movie is really the weakest of the six. And if you change it's still Nick and Nora Charles, so it's still technically a Thin Man film. There's still a murder. There's still the whodunit reveal at the end where everybody is brought together and all the red herrings are eliminated, like we've come to expect from the previous five films. But if you were to remove a few key elements, it could have easily have been, just another film with, a pair of romantic leads, and not a Thin Man film. but it's still a good film, if only for, getting one last, final farewell for Nick and Nora Charles and Asta. Um, and of course, it's nice to see, the fact that they stuck with the same actors for all six films, and you get to see them age. And also, that plays back into how I talked about what makes these films so special is that you really believe in these characters' relationship, and you believe in their affection for one another. And to see this progress through, essentially what is the, time clock of a marriage. And, they have a child halfway through and everything. And then, but the last film, they're of course much older, but still, technically the same people. And it's that makes watching all six films really interesting, because you get to see that like physically happen. So not only do they age, and not only do the films grow over time, but it's really nice and touching in a way that you get to, physically see that and experience that along with everybody else in watching all six of these films. So that's why I think that all six are important, and why I wanted to talk about the whole series, because it's a really underrated series. If anybody knows these, they know the first one, or they know of the idea of Nick and Nora Charles, but they don't know the actual characters. They don't know about Asta. They don't know about the first films being, the darker, more pre-code tinged films, especially the first film, and all of the fun and richness that comes from, watching the whole series and watching these characters develop, and how it really influenced a lot of character tropes and screenwriters, and just pop culture, really, because the things that are presented in here, if you've never seen these films, you will recognize a lot of stuff that you swear you've seen somewhere else, or it just seems so familiar. But it's just it feels so fresh being able to see this stuff, and see where it came from. So and of course, these films have been parodied and referenced ad nauseum, sometimes even by people who don't know what they're parodying or what they're referencing. So that's why I wanted to talk about these, because I think it's perfect to delve back into these around the holidays anyway, particularly because the first film takes place in that strange quasi no man's land of between Christmas and New Year's. And when you're feeling sick or sad or hungover, then the man is perfect. So, talk about video editions a little bit. Again, this is the lovely MGM UA Laserdisc box set, which came out in 91. Like I said, Warner Brothers did the DVDs, and they're really nice if you can find them. They're all standalone discs. They did a box set and included all the DVDs have a few cartoons, but not really any special features. The box set had an additional disc with some A&E biographies of both Powell and Loy. But that's the only real extra, and you can buy that separately if you want to. But the whole thing's out of print, and you either have to buy them individually on eBay, or buy the box set on eBay and pay like 60 or 80 bucks when it gets bid up towards the end of an auction. And since the masters really are not, any different from this Laserdisc box set, I think this is really the way to go. And until I got the set, I'd never got to see the sequels. I'd only seen the original film on DVD and TCM airings and stuff. And I'd seen parts of After the Thin Man and one of the other sequels when it was on TCM once. So this is a no-brainer way to watch this series, because it's not a commonly found release, but it's not rare. And I got this for less than $10. It is dirt cheap. Fantastic pressings. It's a really nice package, but again, it's a thicker box, so it's going to be more expensive to ship, and the top always wants to poke out because it's literally just jam-packed with a lot of MGM sleeves. So do keep that in mind. So if you take it off the shelf, the top will pop off and the disc will flop out, and it's hard to ship, and it's probably hard to find one without some seam splitting. This copy is okay. I found it locally, so thankfully I was able to get one that didn't have the seam splitting. But because there's 6 discs in here and it's a thin box, yep, no pun intended, of course. See that just holding at the top wants to pop off. So do be careful if you're buying a copy of this online to try and get one that's not dinged up or anything. So I alluded to this earlier. So outside the DVDs, the Laserdiscs are your best bet, except for the original film got this astonishing Warner Archive Blu-ray this past year. This is a brand new 4K master. They spent about 3 years, I think they said, scouring vaults for elements. And it was a real hard job for them to do, to combine these elements together to make a scannable new element, which they scanned in 4K, and this thing is just revelatory. So I definitely think this belongs in everyone's collection. It's one of the 5 best discs of the past year. I mean, it's astonishing. I never thought this film in particular, being the first film, being from 1934, and having been reissued a lot and never really restored, and I didn't know what the elements were like, but apparently they're not good. So I don't think they have the whole, or I'm pretty sure the original negative is probably deteriorated by now, and that's why they had to do an element search for so long. But yeah, this thing is just astonishing. So I definitely highly recommend everybody pick up this Blu-ray, and hopefully they will then do the later films if this sells well enough, which I think it has already, but I'm just hoping it does. Outside of that, the only extras you get, you do get the 1936 radio broadcast version of the film with Powell and Loy reprising their roles. They did it. I believe there's this radio show, and then maybe a few other appearances, and then also you get the I believe it's either the pilot episode or one of the first episodes, but there's a short-lived Thin Men TV series in the 1950s, which I think ran for 2 seasons. I've only seen this episode. It was included on the old DVD before, and they re-included it on this Blu-ray as well. Of course, it's a different cast and everything, and it's obviously a 50s television show, but the central idea is still there. So if you like 50s television shows, you might like it, but yeah, it just doesn't have the magic spark and energy of the films, that's for sure. But it's really cool that they included at least one episode on here, so you can look at it, even if only as a curiosity. And then, of course, you have the lovely image they cooked up printed on the disc. So this was a title I never thought would come to Blu-ray. I just didn't. I thought I was going to be stuck watching my Laserdisc copy forever and ever. So this was just a complete shock and happy surprise. And this thing looks stunning. It's stunning to look at. So yeah, and the audio, lossless audio, and sounds fantastic. Sounds as good as the Laserdisc, if not better. So yes, please, everybody, go and get a copy of this. Even if you only watch the first film and you don't bother with any of the sequels, this film is that important. It is in the National Film Registry for a reason, and it's one of the best, most iconic films of the entire 1930s. So Warner Archive, this is one of their best ever releases, and just a stunner of a disc. So to also mention, once again, Libeled Lady, which is the big pairing of Powell and Loy, that is most Thin Man like. You can pick up this Laserdisc version, which is rather uncommon. It's pretty nice transfers from a print source, has PC and mono. It's an older MGM disc, but it still plays really well. The DVD, though, is a little bit cleaner. Grab that. And you might be able to find the DVD easier by itself. It was first released in this now out of print Warner Brothers set entitled the Classic Comedies Collection, which bundles it together with some of the great screwball comedies. And then honestly, if you ever find this set, I would recommend it. Although now some of these are now on Criterion, some are still stuck in DVD land. But you get the special editions of Bringing Up Baby and Philadelphia Story, along with the classic Dinner at 8 and Stage Door, and the iconic Lubitsch masterpiece To Be Not To Be. But the DVD is a little bit cleaned up in terms of transfer over the Laserdisc, and you get a little bonus of a radio show from the time period. But here's the DVD with the awesome cover art. So one day I would love to get the other Thin Man films on DVD to match the Warner Archive Blu-ray, but it's just every time I find a copy on eBay, the box set, I get outbid at the last minute and it like skyrockets. So there are definitely diehard Thin Man fans out there who still want the box set. Um, some of the individual films, though, the DVDs are still available through Warner Archives, so they're printing new copies. Because I've seen some like Thin Man Goes Home with the Warner Archive logo on top. So, and of course, the other Thin Man DVDs would look like this release of Libeled Lady, but this would be the easiest way to watch the film if you don't pick up the Laserdisc, or unless you catch it on TCM one day. If you just happen to catch it airing, if you still have TCM because Comcast decided it was a sports channel, I'm never going to get over that. And then one other film I should mention, because it's just a wonderful film, and if I can mention it, I will. So I mentioned a few minutes ago about parodies and the Thin Man in pop culture, and probably, of course, the most notable one would be when a lovely married couple of detectives turn up who like to drink a lot, and the Neil Simon classic Murder by Death. So the characters played by David Niven and Maggie Smith are total riffs on Nick and Nora Charles. So this is basically a film where based on the Neil Simon play, where he took all of the classic elements of the whodunit murder mystery and brought all of these caricatures of the great detectives, from Mrs. Marple to Charlie Chan to Sam Spade and Poirot and Nick and Nora Charles, into one house where they are challenged to solve a mystery greater than anything they've ever solved before. And most everything in this is of course played for laughs, but in an amusing way. And if you're a fan of detectives or classic mysteries or any of these characters, it's absolutely hysterical. And it's an all-star cast, so it has that for lack of a better term, that old school richness to it. And it's just one of those gems of the 1970s that is really overlooked. And if you ever wondered if there was a film like Clue that isn't Clue, this is really the forerunner to what the 1985 version of Clue became, in terms of feel. And it's like a fun, morbid look at murder. Here on the front, you have the original poster artwork where they actually went and got Charles Adams to draw all of the actors as the caricatures of famous detectives, and you have the body at the bottom with all the knives in his back, and the dog obviously meant to mimic Asta from the Thin Man's. And here is the Adams drawing of the film's versions of Nick and Nora Charles. And of course, all their names have been changed, but they're all like fun homages to the real character names. But yeah, Murdered by Death, this is a wonderful film if you've never seen it. Again, an all-star cast, and it's really great if you're at all a fan of classic murder mysteries, because you will recognize so many elements and cliches that have been done to death. And of course, this film is probably most well known for being the film that Alec Guinness was working on when the script and offer for Star Wars was delivered to him. So it was in between takes and on breaks for this film, Murder by Death, that he decided maybe he'll take a look at this science fiction thing. And he happened to open the script and start reading the script for Star Wars and realized that this was actually something good. So this was the film he was currently making. So yes, I can't recommend this highly enough. This is the Columbia or Sony Laserdisc pressing, again with the lovely Charles Adams artwork on the front. Really nice liner notes. Pretty good transfer with a PCM mono track. There is a DVD of this that's a port of this master, and then Shout Factory just did a Blu-ray release of this, so I'll pick that up at some point. But Shout Factory prices are crazy. They're so expensive. So I just haven't been able to afford getting that. I'm just waiting for it to go on sale somewhere. But yeah, if you would like to see a loving, touching, comedic look at Nick and Nora Charles, look no further than Murder by Death. So that does it for my little spiel and such. Not super long, because these films, there's it's a film series. There's only 6 films, and they're all only so long. And to talk about the plot will give stuff away and stuff like that. So, um, I should also mention that several of the other Powell and Loy films are available. There is one of those TCM Spotlight DVD box sets that has Manhattan Melodrama and about 3 or 4 other films. So if you really like them as a screen pair, and you should, because William Powell and Myrna Loy are probably the best male female screen pairing that has ever been. And that's saying something, because you have the real life pairings of Hepburn and Tracy and Bogart and Bacall, and they may be, much more iconic, but I don't know if there's a better male female team than Powell and Loy. Um, so I would really like to get that TCM box, but those TCM Spotlight boxes are very expensive, and they didn't sell in large quantities. So it's usually, you have to special order them still, and they're not HD, they're still DVDs. So I think still, like, usually like between $30 and $50. So I'm just trying to find at least a used copy one day. But you can rent some of those films from Netflix and other places. And of course, they still run stuff like that on TCM. And if you're interested to see where the pairing started, I would recommend Manhattan Melodrama. It's a really fun early attempt at like blending gangsters and romance and drama over at MGM instead of Warner Brothers. And you've got Clark Gable in there, who's fantastic. So you can take a look at that. It's still a good 30s film. And especially if you want to see where this immortal screen pair really, got started, being paired with one another. So that does it for my spiel and such as it is. And now I'm really parched. Catch up on some comments real quick. Let's see. Wolf saw the Thin Man so long ago, but has totally forgotten all the killers. Yeah, it's almost like new movies. Especially if you give it a while between rewatches. I watched the whole series, and then waited a little while, and then my sister got hooked on them because she finally saw the first one, because I knew she would love them. And so anytime we get together, I try to work in and we watch one of the sequels. So we're about watching them again with her. We're about like halfway through, so she's seen the first 3. So she gets to do 4, 5, and 6 now. So that's been really fun, because I kind of remember what's going to happen, but because it's been so long, I forget all the steps. And then she's coming in cold, so she hasn't seen any of them. But once you see the first one and then the second one, like, if you miss anything, it's going to be a total like pull out the rug, because you've missed a step somewhere and you think it's the wrong person when it's the other person. But all of them are done in such a fun way that it's really cool to go back, and especially when you've forgotten who exactly did it and how. So it does maintain a sort of freshness. So it does help if you wait a while before you rewatch them. Yes, the Hammond novel, it is. Yeah, it's a lot grittier. Yeah, you could still be gritty on the page. You couldn't be in films, even with but between 32 and 34, the production code, it was around, but it wasn't strictly enforced until 1934. But you still couldn't be as gritty as you could in a pulp magazine or in a novel. So yeah, if you've seen the films and love the films, if you go read the Hammett book, you're going to be like, whoa, that's darker. Okay. But it's still really important, and it's still a good book, but it's just a little bit different, so do keep that in mind. Metro Top 10. Hey man. Saint Metal Lady is really not good at all. Yeah. The first time I saw it, I was like, what the hell is this? A golden ram's horn? What? Why is Betty Davis in this? What is going? What? This guy is supposed to be Sam Spade. What is this madness? But the second time I saw it, I don't know, I guess I just kinda learned to go with it, so now every once in a while, I'll watch the, 31 version and the 36 version just as, like, a lark just because, it's a thing and, it's nice to have a different flavor every once in a while. And I'm amazed they ever released them to video actually, when they put out the 3-disc DVD of the Maltese Falcon with those 2 versions in it, back when I was in high school. I bought it day of release, and I was so excited to watch these other 2 versions, and then I was like, "What the hell am I watching?" And then they had, like, a little featurette, like, talking about both and what they were, and I was like, "They did what? Why?" When you have what is possibly the greatest novel ever written, you decide to do what? You know? Um, yeah, because I became a lifelong, devotee of the Maltese Falcon when I saw the 41 version growing up, and then I read Hammett's novel, and that just, like, blew my mind. Um, to then know that they had that story rights and decided to do a halfway decent pre-code version and then turn it into a comedy 5 years later that made no sense. And I'm like, oh my God. Um, so yeah, I've kind of come to terms with it now. It's a strange beast, so it's not for everybody, but then again, I happen to like a lot of weird stuff that I see from the 30s. So if it's from the 30s and 40s, I guess I kind of give it a sort of pass, and then I just kind of delve into the weirdness, and I'm like, I don't know, it's interesting, I guess. But yeah, don't go into Satan Metal Lady expecting the Maltese Falcon because you will not get it. Um, Yes, Pete. Yes, definitely. I hope that if any of you guys are even now thinking about seeing the Thin Man films, I'm happy. So that's why I thought it'd be a cool thing to talk about. Plus, it's really cool to dig back into these around the holiday season because the first one, they're stuck at Christmas parties and they're totally plastered and they're hungover. There's the great scene where they're hungover the next morning and Nick is so bored, hungover, that he takes an air rifle and starts shooting the ornaments off the Christmas tree. And it's like that scene is inherently saying, "Die, Christmas spirit, die! I shoot you with an air pistol." Um, but yeah, they're always fun any time of year. Um, how exactly does color correction work? Can the tools just simply copy and paste the color timing? Um, I mean, that's not a silly question. I mean, color timing basically it has to happen anywhere, whether in a film realm or digital realm. But essentially, with whatever tools you have, it's trying to achieve the look you always wanted and had in mind when shooting something. And you're taking your raw source material, whether it be film based or in the digital realm, and trying to get it closer to what you intended. Because it's just like with photography, if you shoot something, it's not necessarily going to be what you had in mind, and you have options in dark rooms and processing or Photoshop or something. Whereas with color timing, it's much more, finely tuned because you're not talking about a single image. You're talking about many, many, many thousands of images and scenes that may have been shot on different days, or 2 takes that have to be combined that were shot like months apart, or actors on different continents, stuff like that. So color correction is not just about, and color timing isn't about, color timing is usually we're talking about when you're, timing your final print or your final master. But it's also just like a final color correction pass in that sense. Whereas color correction is what you do first. Some people say color correction now instead of color timing because timing refers to timing film prints, but you can use either term kind of interchangeably. Um, but yeah, there are some things now they call them LUTs or LUTs where they come up with like pre-programmed like passes and things. So there are things you can apply in terms of color and contrast and black level and stuff as like a quick application, but not everybody does that. And it's personally, I would still, if it were me, I would do everything, one at a time. But there are things like that where kind of like is what you would do in Photoshop, where there are, quick fixes and shortcuts and things like that, just like with anything. Um, But yeah, no, it's not a silly question at all. It's in a lot of ways, I think it's a lost art, but it's something that has to happen with every single mastering job or restoration and stuff. And like if you look even at before and afters and restoration comparisons, the final product is not just fixing tears and stuff, but it's also doing color timing and color correction, even on black and white stuff, because it's still the same. Even though there is no color, they still have to worry about the grayscale and the black levels and the contrast, just like they would for a color image. Um, so yeah, it's extraordinarily important, but it's something that most people don't really pay much of attention to, which they should, because it's super important. Because if you look at a film print of anything, it's going to look remarkably different from most, if not all, video releases of the same thing, or HD masters, or the Blu-ray, or the 4K release, or something. There's always going to be some variance, but and nothing's ever going to look like the negative, because the negative is what went through the camera. So if you go back and you scan the negative, then you have to worry about, well, what did it look like on the original release? Because the negative doesn't look like the original release print. The release print is a couple generations away and was color timed back in the day, and probably has faded by now. But you need some sort of reference, because if you go scan the negative, it has no color timing applied to it. So you can do a 4K scan of original camera negative, and then you got to worry about the fine tuning and making it look like what it did on the original release. Because if you don't, you run into problems like on the Road Warrior Blu-ray, where they scanned the negative, but they didn't make sure to do the color timing right. So all of a sudden, the red apocalyptic sands are all pure white and the sky is clear blue, whereas all the original release prints and the older video releases, it was a darker sky. The dust was red because they did a lot of color timing on the release prints. And the cinematographer had to spend a lot of time doing the color timing on the original 1982 release prints. You look at the Blu-ray, beautiful, uncut, fantastic. The color's wrong, but that's just an example. But that's what can happen if you don't pay a lot of attention or do the research and stuff like that. So negative scans are great. It's amazing you can scan the negative, but you have to worry about making proper references and doing your proper timing, and going through every single step. So yeah, I would argue it's extremely important, but it doesn't get talked about very much. um, kind of sort of step out. Thanks for hanging out, man. Uh, I suspect it's Asta Junior by the end, but hey, yeah, it would be funny if they had made one and it's just like they suddenly turn to the end. They both are like this. Asta, what did you do? Why did you kill this man? Oh, well, Asta, that's not a good thing to do. And Asta's just like, that'd be great. Asta, the murderer dog. Oh, cool. Wolf got a wow. Wolf got a copy of Libeled Lady and George Stevens, along with more hoppy westerns. Wow, less expensive than usual. Excellent. um. Oh, forgot you had Murdered by Death. Yeah. Oh man, Murdered by Death is fun to go back to every once in a while. I think it makes the perfect double bill with Clue. If there's any movie to double bill with Clue, it's Murdered by Death. Um, Oh, Pete watching Dice Caves on a video on Spielberg, and when I came across your comment, I was shocked by how your top 5 Spielberg films are identical to mine, basically. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, usually if you talk about Spielberg with most people, they know the main ones and that's it. And the fact that they only know certain Spielberg films now doesn't bode well for much of film history, because you're now lucky if people know 2 Hitchcock films. If they know anything besides Psycho, it's like, wow, man, thank goodness you know at least 2. But the fact that they only know like 1 or 2 Spielberg films now, because we're now several generations down the road, and it's just like, wow, it's like that used to be everybody knew the whole Spielberg filmography. But and then of course he's made so many films in the past few years that people don't really care about, or just kind of came and went. But still, it's kind of like people don't even know that stuff anymore. and then they don't know what I think are the real gems. Like Sugarland Express should be known by everybody, but it's not. Close Encounters isn't known by everybody, and that's just ridiculous. There are a lot of people out there who haven't seen all three indie films. It's like that. Oh, but I can kind of go back and forth and constantly tweak them. But it's basically Raiders, Temple, Jaws, Duel, and it fluxes from there. But those are the four, and then it's Sugarland, Empire of the Sun, and Last Crusade, and Close Encounters, and then they hodgepodge all around. So it constantly fluctuates. But yeah, those top four of his for me, those are never gonna go away. So I can change around what's at number five. But those top four, they may change in order, but Duel, Jaws, Raiders, Temple, those are just like unassailable. And I a lot of people hate it. Some people really like it. I like 1941 for some of it, and every once in a while I rewatch that every couple of years, and I'm like, yeah, this is another one of the boy directors gone flop, like everybody did. It's a lot better than other people's flops, but you can see why it flopped and why it lost so much money. But I'd sit through 1941 any day before I sat through New York, New York again, because man, that is just difficult to get through. Which, if you're not aware, that is what the movie Scorsese made in the late 70s, which flopped very badly. A lot of people who were the great, young, successful directors, they all had a failure of sorts in the 70s. Bogdanovich had one, Friedkin had one on Sorcerer, Spielberg's was 1941, Scorsese's was New York, New York. Everybody thought Coppola was going to destroy his career on Apocalypse Now. But it got to a point where everybody was waiting for, the successful ones to get their comeuppance, in some sort of weird, negative way. But, yeah, at least 1941 you can enjoy in parts. New York, New York is like very disquietingly intense, and it's also a musical, and I'm not one for musicals, but it's also like a really intensive drama in a musical with unlikable characters. And then there's the extended director's cut on Laserdisc, and then there's like 3 cuts of the movie, and yeah, it's just I would gladly watch 1941 again. But yeah, it's I think the Spielberg question is interesting, because I think you can get so many varied answers, but it's going to be like the same 5 or 6 up there at the top, and then like the differences come in like what people put in 5, 6, 7, stuff like that. Oh boy. Garrick watched Prisoner of Zenda, the Selznick version, for the first time last night. Have to ask, best sword fight: Coleman and Fairbanks Jr. at the end of Zenda, or Flynn and Rathbone and Adventures of Robin Hood? Oh man. That is a good question. Well, it's kind of hard, because the Robin Hood fight is so iconic, and the whole movie builds up to that. The Zenda fight, the whole movie builds up to it, but that's also, part of the story intrinsically. Whereas in Robin Hood, it's been told and retold so many times that you could do it in different ways. I think the staging of the fight and the lighting and the color cinematography and everything is so much bigger in scale, and it's so much more rousing in Adventures of Robin Hood. But the fight in Zenda is extremely dramatic, because it's the end, the climax of the film, and it builds to that moment where Rassendyll has to swim the moat alone to break into the castle and find the king before they can and kill the guards before the guards can kill the king, because there's multiple ways they can kill the king. So if anybody's alerted, the king is dead and all is lost. So there's like 5 or 6 different things going on. So there's a level of suspense there, which is also in the book, that you don't get in Robin Hood. So I love them both, but the Robin Hood fight is the more iconic one. the fight in the Seahawk is even bigger, which is crazy. And it's really funny because Basil Rathbone always hated the fact that he was a better fencer than Errol Flynn and trained, and Flynn wasn't, and Rathbone always had to lose. And then when Errol Flynn fought Henry Daniell in the Seahawk, Henry Daniell couldn't fence to save his life, so they always had to cut to cutaways. And so if you look very closely, there's a double, doing all the fighting, and then it cuts back to Henry Daniell like this, but the fight is even more epic. And the camera just swoops around and the shadows go up on the wall. But if you're talking best sword fight, it's the Mark of Zorro remake with Ty Power and Basil Rathbone. And Tyrone Power is not even in the Zorro costume. He fights as Don Diego, which makes it even more impressive because he's just like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to fight you as if I'm not holding back and being the foppish Don Diego. And they just go for broke. And it's in one little office. It's not in a big chamber. It's not in a basement. It's not in a castle. And they do the stuff and they chop the candles and keep them lit and everything. So they lift up the candle and it's chopped in half, but it stayed intact because it's a piece of wax. So that in terms of actual technical sword fighting, it's probably got to be Mark of Zorro. But yeah, I just love them all. I love them all. I do. If you have a good sword fight, I'm just totally happy. So yeah. And then the Captain Blood fight with Flynn and Rathbone is outstanding because they do it on the beach and they're jumping up and off the rocks. And again, they build to it. They don't just, go, oh, character, sword fight. Ooh, one guy dies. Ooh, let's move on. No, it builds to that. You know who this guy is. He's been goading the main character for so long, and now they have to fight, for that matter, although Henry Daniell wasn't much of a villain, I love the Seahawk. The Seahawk's fantastic, but I got to disagree with you there. Henry Daniell is phenomenal. like he can be so villainous with just like that look, but it's it's a very cultured and internal villainy. Like he's such a great villain because he can hide it. So in Seahawk, he's able to move through the corridors of power, but in reality, he's like the real villain. So in a lot of ways, it's very much a precursor to the whole Emperor Palpatine is actually Senator Palpatine and just works in the Senate every day. But, at night he goes back to being evil Sith Lord throwing lightning. And he always has this sort of nastiness in all his characters, whether it's the editor kid in the Philadelphia Story or his phenomenal performance in The Body Snatcher as the corrupt and haunted doctor who's menaced by Boris Karloff's character, who knows all the Dr. McFarlane's dirty secrets. And so this internal battle that rages within that character and that performance. So yeah, but it's a different kind of villainy and evil that we just don't get it anymore. But yeah, he could be cold. He could just be cold, And I think that's why he was so well relied on by Hollywood casting agents for so long. But yeah, if Basil Rathbone had been in the Seahawk, that would have been really interesting. I do love Henry Daniell in that. The only thing I wish had been different, I wish it had been Olivia de Havilland in the Seahawk just to make it another Flynn de Havilland movie. And that's nothing against. Oh crap! I'm totally blanking on her name. Wow. It's not Brendan Marshall, is it? Let me double check. Because I have it right behind me, of course. No, it is Brendan Marshall. I was correct. Wow. So although Brenda Marshall is great, Seahawk, you wish it had been Olivia de Havilland since she's in practically every other major Flynn film. But that's my only what if with this film. Otherwise, it's absolutely fantastic. Like it goes for broke. This is an action movie. Like this is an adventure movie with two clenched fists. Okay, yeah, kids today still will like Pirates of the Caribbean because they're like pirates, and I'm like, no, this is a pirate movie. This has everything. This even has a total they get captured and they're stuck on an island subplot, and then they come back for pure revenge. and gallantry and patriotism, and yeah, that the Seahawk is a pirate movie, and it has such an incredible musical score that it's just like, my God, like it's just like they could just write on the screen in big block letters, "They don't make them like this anymore," literally, and like flash it in neon. Um, let's see. Talking about Spielberg again, people say E.T., Chandler's List, Saving Private Ryan, Jurassic Park. Yeah, those are way too easy for me. I gotta say, like, I mean, Chandler's List is good. It's fine. It's not something I'm going to watch all the time, but I think it also kind of gets because of the subject matter. It instantaneously everybody's like, "Oh, it's great," which I'm like, "Yeah, it's very good and all," but I don't know if because it's about such a harrowing, dark subject matter that really happened that automatically makes it great. Um, I mean, I enjoy Jurassic Park. It's fine. I don't think it's great. I've never been obsessed with it. I've never been big on ET because it's just way too saccharine sweet for me. It's like ET is a movie for kids. Close Encounters is for adults and everybody else. But ET is still very good and all. The only one I would say I have definite problems with. I have problems with Saving Private Ryan. Every time I try and rewatch it every couple years, I'm like, my gosh, nothing happens in this movie. It's so long. It's so disjointed. Half of it is like the dry run for Band of Brothers in so many different ways. And if it had been made in the 1940s, it would have been a really great 90 to 100-minute long movie, and it would have been over and done with. Because all anybody remembers are certain sequences. If you boiled it down to that, it could have been 100 minutes, and it would have been a lot better, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, that's the one I have real issues with, and I hate the cheesy bookends so much. It's just like, oh, it's like for me, that's where the whole notion of old man Spielberg really started, and when I think his features really started to take a nosedive in terms of quality and content, and just pandering to just the most cliched stuff. I mean, every once in a while he does something that has some flashes of good stuff in it. Um, I think Minority Report is actually surprisingly strong. I think it cops out on its ending, which most modern Spielberg movies do. Um, I thought Munich was surprisingly engaging, but again, it didn't. I don't think it went far enough. But I was amazed that he made that. But of course, like practically 10 people saw Munich and nobody else. So if you talk about Munich as a Spielberg movie, they're like, "A what? Isn't that a place in Europe?" I'm like, Never mind." Um, but yeah, it's like, and it frustrates me all the more because he could do something really great if he wanted to, but yet he's remaking West Side Story because I don't know. So yeah, that's why I get really frustrated. Whereas, um, yeah, and but then again, they don't really have that level of they rule the industry anymore, because even Steven Spielberg has to struggle to get projects made and go around for financing and go to different studios and stuff, because the whole infrastructure is changed. And when even those guys have to do that, then something's clearly going wrong. Um, but yeah. I will agree. I do think 1941 is underrated. I think it has that whole moniker of being a bomb, and people like to stick that on there until they'll talk about 1941, or they talk about Cleopatra, the 63 films, being the most notorious bomb. And I'm like, well, I mean, underneath the long run time and all the money they spent on it, I mean, there are the bones of a good movie in there. And even Cleopatra technically eventually broke even. It is not a complete bomb. It eventually made money, like just barely, but it did. Took a long time, but it did. The problem was arose the movie drags on afterwards. That is an interesting point, because yeah, if you talk about the 1940 Mark of Zorro remake, it's so patterned after Adventures of Robin Hood that it's literally Robin Hood in California. With it's like literally they should have just put on there Warner Brothers made a crap ton of money with Adventures of Robin Hood. So Darrow Zanuck thought it would be a good idea to take Ty Power and do Zorro because we can get the rights to that, except rework it to literally be Robin Hood in old California, and to save money, we shot it in black and white, the movie. And it's still great and I love it to death, but you have to totally acknowledge that. But the whole notion of him revealing his identity and then the movie goes on for a bit longer and then all the townspeople join in. That's kind of tied into the original book Curse of Capistrano and the original Douglas Fairbanks 1920 Mark of Zorro. So the 1940 version draws not only from Adventures of Robin Hood, but the original silent movie as well. So you could make that argument, but it also fits dramatically, that they're all locked up in the prison cells and have to be broken out and just storm the town and take back over and stuff. But yeah, definitely loses energy after that sword fight because it's just like so intense. And then it's just like whoop, and then do and cut, let's see. Sega dropped in. Oh, audio didn't work. Okay. Yeah, definitely check back the playback. Yeah, sometimes I have trouble even getting my stream started, so I can't imagine trying to get connected to a stream. Um, Cutthroat Islands is the definitive pirate movie. I've never seen it all the way through. I've always been kind of hesitant because you hear so many bad things about it. I've seen pieces of it on cable like a million times through the years, and I've always been like, you know what? I need to just watch the darn thing. I really love Die Hard 2. I mean, Cliffhanger is okay, so I can live with Rennie Harlan stuff. Oh, it can't possibly be that bad, can it? Yeah. The poster art's pretty good, so yeah, I'm finally gonna go through it. Sometimes you kind of avoid things gingerly for a while, and then you're kind of like, well, maybe. Sometimes you're pleasantly surprised. And then other times you're like, I see what people meant. Okay, let's move on. Let's see. Oh, Metro says Lost World is Spielberg's most underrated picture. That's interesting. I've heard some people stick up for it. I only saw it once, so now that I got the Spielberg box, which includes a copy on Blu-ray. I just got it for Duel and Sugarland when it was on sale. So now that I have a Blu-ray copy, I figured I'd watch through it again and see if I thought it was any better. But I don't know. When people talk about things being underrated, I always try to apply that only to stuff that I feel is like genuinely not as well known. I'd say Lost World is probably maybe a little undervalued because everybody just views it as a sequel. And I remember there being one or two interesting ideas in there. But again, I saw it years and years and years and years ago. But in terms of Spielberg's most underrated picture, it is definitely either it's like a toss up between Sugarland Express and Empire of the Sun, probably. Sugarland Express because it is so important to his whole oeuvre, and it's his second feature film, and it's really good. I mean, it's really, really good. It's very 70s. It doesn't shy away from darkness and grittiness. Without Sugarland Express, you wouldn't have Jaws, you wouldn't have Close Encounters. And Empire of the Sun is really, really good, even though it's technically Spielberg wants to be David Lean, the movie. And it's not perfect, but I still love it, and it's actually intelligent and based on J.G. Ballard's own experiences as a child, and I love the whole dynamic of it. But then again, I could say Duel is Spielberg's most underrated movie because although people recognize it as a great film and people know it's his first movie and it was made as a TV movie and it was so good they had to release it as a feature in Europe, doesn't mean most people have actually seen it. Because it's a masterpiece and everybody should see it. And, it's one of those few select films that if you do like the how to make a movie in visual terms. You put Duel on, and that's a freaking textbook. I mean, it's that good. It's like, how does somebody come out swinging that hard at that age is just like, I don't know. And it was supposed to be a TV movie of the week, and it has the simplest story in the world that could be told in one sentence: truck chases guy, period. How do you make that play for 60 minutes, let alone the expanded 90-minute version? It's just like, um, so yeah, I can make the argument for several. I mean, even Always has its fans, which I don't really. I mean, it's okay. I haven't watched it in a number of years, but anytime you remake something that's a really undervalued classic, I'm like, I don't I don't think you're doing very well for yourself, because like certainly he's not setting himself up well remaking West Side Story. But he remade A Guy Named Joe as Always, and I'm like, well, it didn't turn out so bad. It's nowhere near as important or good or as emotional as the original film, but who knows? Maybe Steven Spielberg could remake West Side Story and it turn out like Always, where people are just like, meh, and then they kind of forget about it. Which I don't think it'll go that well. I'm sure it's going to be horrible, but um, there you have it. Cleopatra isn't terrible, just interminable. Yeah, it's too long, and you can just feel the smoldering of egos as money burns in the background as you watch it. And you're just like, how many people lost their jobs because of this movie? The world may never know. 1, 2, 3. How many millions does it take to get the entire studio fired? The world may never know. Uh, Sorry, it's a terrible joke. Not enough people say it. Duel is one of the greatest movies ever made. Should be top priority for film school, especially on suspense. Yes, you are preaching to the choir, Pete. Absolutely. I heard about Duel when I was a kid, and I saw it available for rent in the video store, and that's how I first got to see it. I rented it, and then oh gosh, that just destroyed me. I was just like I couldn't do anything. I was just zoned in, couldn't look away. I was just like terrified that just for this poor guy in the dinkiest little red car in the history of time, that he was obviously going to die. Like there was no getting around it. He had the worst car in the world, this dinky little red car that was going to fall apart any minute. And he was just, it's like, how's this guy? He has no escape. Like this is just it. And I thought poor Dennis Weaver was dead. And it still plays and it still works and hasn't dated a bit. If you ever get the chance to see it on a big screen, oh my gosh, I got to see a double bill of Duel and Sugarland Express once, it was about 5 or 10 years ago, both on 35, and it was great because they ran Duel open, in 133, and then they took an intermission break and reformatted, and Sugarland is obviously in scope, so they reformatted because it's a theater with a masking screen, so they had to reformat for scope. But it was really great because as much as it plays on you at home, if you ever get the chance to see it on a big screen, it's even better. It really is. Yeah, Markham Zero even has Eugene Pellet's Fire Truck. Yes, I forgot to mention. Yeah, they copied Adventures of Robin Hood. Fox in 1940 did so much that they even brought over some of the same cast to play literally the same parts. So yeah, if you ever wanted a sequel to Adventures of Robin Hood, it's really the 1940 Mark of Zorro. So it's literally like the same movie. They just changed lead character, went from color to black and white, and made it a Zorro movie. Anybody watching Crisis on Infinite Earth? I've read some about it, but I haven't watched any of it. I did read some of the original story arc when I was growing up, but I never really could understand how all the timelines intersected and how all of it worked. But I did know it was basically what they did to like jumpstart the DC timeline in the 80s. So I would like to finally read the whole thing and see if it actually made some semblance of sense. But all I know is it's just basically the big, DC event of the '80s before Marvel started doing all of their, comics runs leading up to all their events for the past, 10, 20 years, all the Endgame and Infinity War and Civil War and all that stuff. Well, DC did it back with Crisis in the '80s, technically. But yeah, I'm interested to see how they pull that off, because it's not like it's something that's going to be easy to adapt. Um, okay, Pete saying he would tie Jaws and Raiders for number one, followed by Close Encounters, Duel, and Temple. Wiggling back and forth on Duel and Temple. Yeah, it's just one of those things. It's like I couldn't even begin to do a top five Hitchcock films. I just can't do it. I'd be like, I just have to like bite the bullet and say five, and then like 2 seconds later, I'd be like, well, no, what about Lady Vanishes, and what about a Saboteur, and I gotta have this in there, and then this in there, and then where do you cram in all of them? You can't possibly get five in there. Oh, good to see fellow Empire of the Sun lovers. I'm so happy that anybody at least recognizes that when I bring it up, let alone actually saw it and like it and knows what I'm talking about. Because usually you just get the blank stare and the best you can get. And I'm like, it's the movie with little Christian Bale when he's like 7, and they're all like, oh yeah, the one where Batman is like the little kid with the English accent. I'm like, yeah, that one. And they're like, oh yeah, I saw that once. I think they showed it in school. Okay. Empire of the Sun was Peter Fonda's favorite film. That's interesting. I did not know that. Wow. That's really interesting. I had no idea. I didn't know Peter Fonda was a big Spielberg fan, but wow, they should put that on the box, man. That's Peter Fonda says Spielberg didn't blow this one. Buy Empire of the Sun on Blu-ray. It's terrible. I don't know. Is that better? Or that's got to be better than the usual blurbs they put now that don't even have the obscure critic from the middle of nowhere saying a bad movie is good. Oh, Wolf Like Always. Yeah, I do need to rewatch it. I've got the Laserdisc, and I now have a copy on Blu-ray in that box set too. So I do plan on rewatching it. I mean, I remember it being good and okay, but I think A Guy Named Joe is really underrated. I think it's quite amazing. But it's not a fair comparison really, because A Guy Named Joe has Victor Fleming and Spencer Tracy at the height of the MGM machine, whereas Always does not have that. So it's kind of like it's very, the scales are very tipped in A Guy Named Joe's favor. But yeah, I do want to rewatch that. And I do need to finally go through and see all the late period Spielberg films I've either skipped or missed out on, just to finally get them out of the way. But I was like, I didn't want to see War Horse, and I didn't want to see Watered Down All the President's Men, aka The Post. But I need to finally just say okay. I mean, they've all got to be better than The Terminal, right? Right. I know The Terminal's not that bad. I just like using it as a punchline because it's just gotta cause ya. I don't know if I'm ever gonna get over that. There was one of those movies where the whole family went to see it in a theater, and it was just like, what are we watching? Yeah, the War of the Worlds remake is, I mean, it's pretty good because they put so much of what was then the current populace into it, and you have the whole post 9/11 mentality that everybody was still dealing with, so they were able to funnel that into it. So I think the whole you are in 2005 element of it is nice, and that way they were able to take H.G. Wells's creation and make it modern and vibrant, which is what he did with his original novel, and what Orson Welles did by transposing it to 1938 America on the Mercury radio broadcast. So they were basically doing what they had done. Of course, what George Pell did in making the 1953 version by bringing it smack dab into the atomic age of the 1950s. So that made sense. I was fine with that. Um, I just, I couldn't really get into it all that much. And the fact that it was still War of the Worlds, you knew exactly how it was going to turn out. And I'm like, well, if I wanted to watch War of the Worlds, like, watch the George Powell version or listen to the Mercury broadcast, or best of all, go read Wells, because you can never do better than going back to the source. But for what it is, I think it's it still holds up pretty well. It's like Minority Report in that way, but I still prefer Minority Report, even though I think the ending is a total cop out on Minority Report. So much so that I actually pretend like the ending happened before the ending. And if you know the film, you probably know what I'm talking about. I wish they had included an extra ending tag. That would have made the whole film so much better. But I still like a lot of what they did in Minority Report, even though, like a lot of Philip K. Dick adaptations, it gets way far away from what the original story was. But yeah, that's it's a topic where you can just keep going and going and going, because it's like a whole lot of hits in the beginning of Spielberg's career, a whole lot of different, interesting, and some head scratchers in the middle, and then successes mixed in, and then you get towards the late 90s, and then what we have now, where it's a lot of head scratchers and I don't knows, and your results may vary. We should put it that way. Like the opening of Temple and then parts in the actual Temple, was a long way between those bits. Yeah, I can understand that. Raiders, you can kind of feel it's sequential, but Temple is much more so, in terms of, if you stop and think about it, it's like, well, it's like serial chapters, just like Raiders is, but Temple is much more. You could feel that if you wanted to, or it's like action sequence stuff, action sequence stuff, action sequence stuff. But I think there's so much atmosphere that's generated in all those scenes. Like, take for example, after the opening in Club Obi-Wan, the fact that the car chase has all the comedy and has all that structure, and the fact that then they use the getaway to the plane, not only to set up the fact that the pilots are going to bomb out, but the fact that Lao Che gets the upper hand, and that puts them on course to getting to the small village. And the fact that once the raft out of the plane sequence happens, then the Whitewater River chase happens, and this is all happening at once. And if you're an audience seeing this for the first time, you are totally just like, oh, like you're on a roller coaster ride. So you need that time to breathe afterwards. And they also use that to generate atmosphere, because if you look at the photography, the score, the pacing, like even the moments where the people of the village first come out, it sort of has that creepy vibe where they come out of nowhere, and then they take their time to bring Indy, Willie, and Short Round into the village. And then the score stays with that same sort of vibe, like they're in another sort of world, and they go into the village and they find it's basically been torn apart and everyone is suffering and all the children have been taken away, and there's a darkness there, and it's like they're being drawn towards the temple itself. And of course, I may be adding on a lot of stuff that nobody ever intended to. I may be reading in a ton of artistic pretentiousness in there, but that's how it's always felt to me. And I really appreciated that they took their time, and it was like the whole first third of the movie was like trying to draw the unwary travelers into the Temple of Doom itself. Like the evil spirits drew them in with promises of fortune and glory, and that Indy himself kind of sort of recognizes this. And I even love the character interplay, and the dialogue and all the little lines are just fantastic. And again, the character interplay, especially, I love the scene at the dinner table, not the gross out stuff that people remember, but I love the actual dialogue between Indy and the Maharaja and oh gosh, the character's name escapes me, but his essentially prime minister, who is of course the underling of Molaram, and the British colonial officer, and they're talking about the Thuggee cult, and Indy's dressed in his tweed jacket, and he's got the bow tie, but he's got his glasses on, and he's all rough, but it's like they're talking serious stuff, and Indy's like probing all these questions about the Thuggee, and you note that the British officer, while brushing it off, is slowly becoming interested in what the prime minister is actually going to answer with, and then it all gets cut off by the Maharaja, who's being prompted by his controlling force. So there's stuff going on there, that if you don't look at it very very closely, or if you've just been overwhelmed by the action sequences, it may seem a bit slow and stuff, but I really appreciate that there's an intelligence there in all of the slow scenes, and it's not just having a breather after the action set pieces, like practically everything does now, where there's no substance. You know, I could make an argument for practically any scene in Temple of Doom as being fantastic and full of substance and subtext, and there's multiple layers going on. Whereas you don't really get that as much in Last Crusade, I would argue. It's there, especially in the father-son dynamic, but it's not the same level of intensity throughout that you have in Temple of Doom, which I think is another shortcoming of Last Crusade. But I digress. I get tired of everybody harping on that Temple of Doom is not as good and it's different and it's super dark, and I'm like, but it's supposed to be. You don't want to do the same thing over and over, or do you? um but anyway, again, that may be just me totally reading in way too much into what was never intended. And of course, the whole dinner scene was inspired by the dinner scene in Octopussy, which was the year before, which of course was inspired by Raiders of the Lost Ark. But Spielberg is a giant Bond fan, and the scene in Octopussy where Bond and Kamal Khan are talking about, technically the plot, and Kamal is talking about the method of which they're going to torture Bond to make him reveal the information he has about the contraband Fabergé egg they had been smuggling, that he was flaunting about. Most people may not pay attention to the fact that Bond is talking about, are they going to use ancient methods of torture like thumb screws and hot coals? Hardly. We're far more sophisticated here than that. We prefer a mixture of curare with slight hallucinogenic compounds, guaranteed effectiveness, but with permanent brain damage as a side effect. But with permanent brain damage, an unfortunate side effect. I mean, they're talking about torture to the point that the poor torturee will be permanently brain damaged and technically worse than dead. But most people are not getting that. They just remember the stuffed sheep's head that they bring out, and Kamal just takes the eyeball out and just like lovingly, like slowly pops it in his mouth and just chews on it while everybody just stares. So that in turn inspires not only the dinner conversation, but the whole gross out table in Temple of Doom, right down to the stuffed snake full of bugs, and of course the stuffed chilled monkey brain. But anyway, all this stuff constantly reflects on itself. And of course, Temple of Doom is nothing but a gigantic love letter to Gunga Din, which is why it's even more of a 30s film than Raiders is, which is why I love it so much, and probably why a lot of other people are very confused, because it's like, oh, they like Raiders, but Temple is even more of a 30s throwback, and they're probably not really used to 30s movies. But for me, it's like, oh my God, well, can we get like another 20 like this? Because this is like the greatest. Oh yes, thank you. I did finally crack 1,000 LDs on the database. I had actually not realized. I thought I was up to date, but I actually wasn't. So I had to go back and re-update. So I was actually over 1,000 when I thought I was still under 1,000. Yeah, that. So I'm trying to now figure out which disc was actually technically my 1,000th disc. I think because usually I just get discs in one at a time when I find them locally, or I buy a lot of discs, or people have sent me some mystery boxes like Melinda has. And so I input them all at once. So I'm trying to figure out which one is technically number 1000. Um, but it was when I got the classic horror discs in from the last go round. So it's one of those. So for lack of a better for lack of a better guess, I'm just going to say my 1000th disc was Night of the Demon. So that's a good number 1000. Jeez, it's weird to even say that. I only started collecting Laserdiscs for 2 things, and now I'm 1000 plus. That's crazy. It doesn't even feel like it, but yeah, definitely don't. I need more shelves. So maybe that's the indicator. Lawnmower Man unrated on LD. It's pretty good, but it's a 133 transfer. Actually, it's not widescreen on the common silver one. You have to track down that rare late release with AC3 to actually get it in widescreen. Um, I I'm not too big on the film actually. I don't know. It's just something about it. It's not really not exactly my cup of tea. Like the plot with the artificial intelligence enhancement. Like I get it. It's okay, but I'll admit the whole reason why I got it and watched it in the first place was because it was a Pierce Brosnan non-Bond film, so I had to see it. um, but yeah, I mean it's okay. But yeah, if you get that the silver cover laser disc, you got to keep in mind it's not actually widescreen. So if you want the unrated director's cut in widescreen, you have to get that harder to find AC3 pressing, which is much more expensive. I think the database usually has it for like $60 to $80. It's like a lot more expensive and much harder to find. So, and you can get the other one that I have for like, a buck or two. It's super common. Um, so yeah, it's I mean it's okay. If you just get the common one, then you're fine. But if you really want it in widescreen, you have to track down the late release. Um Siskel Ebert thumbs up was on the cover of Speed 2. Yeah, I mean, it's not bad. When I finally sat down and watched it, I'm like, I was expecting the worst thing in the world, and I'm like, it's not horrible. I remember we rented it back in the day and watched it, and I didn't remember much outside of Willem Dafoe and a bathtub of leeches, and I was like, well, that's weird. Um, but I figured I'd watch it because I got the LD and I had really, rewatched Speed and forgotten how really great that is. And I was like, man, this is an awesome laser disc and it's got a nice sound mix. And yeah, it's a little stupid and it needed Keanu, but it's not terrible. It doesn't deserve the hate it gets. I can understand why Roger Ebert gave it a positive review, especially for that summer of '97. And it's okay. It's not great, but it's not, a waste of your time and money. It's not, I mean, some of the plot is stupid, but it's not like insanely stupid. It's better than the summer tentpole movies we have now. I don't know. So yeah, if you've never seen Speed 2, give it a shot. It's not bad. It's just kind of forgettable. But it has Willem Dafoe going crazy in a bathtub full of leeches. What's not to love? A boat goes out of control, which, I mean, yeah, it moves slower, but technically a boat can go out of control. So, it's still plausible. And again, Willem Dafoe goes crazy with a bathtub full of leeches. I mean, does that not sell it for you? Does that not make up for the lack of Keanu? I mean, it really doesn't, but it's like there are worse things. I would rather see Speed 2 again than watch Saving Private Ryan again. That's just me. Yeah, I'll say that. Just to pull an example out of the I know that sounds really ridiculous, but yeah, Speed 2 is not bad. And again, it's a lot shorter than Saving Private Ryan, so, Um Oh, Wolf's gonna check out A Guy Named Joe. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I only have it on Laserdisc. It's one of those MGM classics that's a late release, so it can be hard to find and a little pricey. They seem to do a number of those, particularly World War II dramas, like in '97, '98. So, um, earlier ones from the earlier 90s, like 30 Seconds Over Tokyo and stuff like that is pretty common, but Guy Named Joe is pricey. So you might have an easier time finding it on DVD. But the Laserdisc is great if you can find one that doesn't set you back a lot. Oh, Metro love Minority Report, except for the constant shine. Yeah. Um, it does seem like they dialed that back some on the Blu-ray. Some people have complained they miss how the DVD looks. So if you put on the Blu-ray compared to the DVD, it does look like maybe they dialed that back some. I didn't get to see it theatrically. I've only ever seen it on DVD and then the Blu-ray. So I wasn't able to see it theatrically to see if it looked like the DVD or the Blu-ray. But you might want to check the Blu-ray and see if that's more to your liking. Um, I mean, I like the idea visually, but yeah, after a while, it gets really old. um, yeah, it's best to just go with the Dick adaptations instead of expecting them to be like a full on adaptation because they'll deviate so much. Yeah, I adore Blade Runner because it's like a parallel. It exists like side by side with Do Androids Dream as opposed to just being a straight adaptation. And I've only read select Dick novels, but I've always meant to read more. But I've seen a number of the adaptations, and I know they're all completely different. I think the other one that's pretty close, and I was actually quite surprised how well it worked, was Scanner Darkly, and that, of course, being the early uh, live action CG animation hybrid with drawing over the actors. And I think that did a remarkable job at like trying to get the paranoia inherent in Dick's writing, and of course the whole drug culture that it permeates throughout the film. So I thought that was actually quite interesting. I didn't think it was going to work very well, but I was quite surprised. I thought that was much closer to the vibe that you get from reading Philip K. Dick than let's just say it's a lot better than most of the adaptations. Most of the adaptations are terrible. Yeah, and the problem with the Mercury World War of the Worlds was the big problem was the major program of the evening ended early, so people switched over looking for something and missed the opening of the Mercury broadcast saying this is a dramatization and we have updated it to make it interesting. Because if we did the book, people wouldn't care. So we've updated it and it's going to be like news broadcasts. And they did a disclaimer at the beginning and people missed that and they switched over right as soon as the broadcaster is talking about the touchdown in New Jersey, and they were like freaking out, and they were like, what? Because they thought it was real, because they were just looking for something else because they were all listening to a different program and it ended like 5 minutes early that night. So then they twist their radio dial and land on Martians have landed in New Jersey, and they're like, what? So had that not happened, it wouldn't have been the same thing, and that's what led so many to be listening to the Mercury show, which wouldn't have been like their regular audience would have heard the disclaimer because they were listening to the whole thing. But that, of course, was only figured out, a long time later when people dug into what in the heck happened. But yeah, that's what really did it. So people missed the disclaimer at the beginning. And of course, none of it was intentional. And thank goodness nothing went really wrong, and nobody was really harmed or charged with any sort of negligence or anything. Of course, nothing like this had ever happened before, so it wasn't on anybody's mind. The indie films were made in the late 30s. Who would be a Dreamcast? Oh my gosh, that is that's hard. That's really hard. Because Indy is his own entire character, and it'd be hard to pick one classic actor that would do all of that, because he's basically like a mix. Like Spielberg always viewed him as darker, like Fred Dobbs and Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and he had that vision of Bogart as Fred C. Dobbs. And Lucas viewed Indy as lighter, and Harrison is somewhere in the middle. And those three ideas are what give you the lightness and the darkness and the humor and the different sides to Indy's character. So, there's a bit of Errol Flynn in there, of course. There's I mean, there's a dash of Clark Gable. There's a dash of, so many different things. Yeah, if they did those in the 30s, I don't know actually. I'd have to really think about that because I don't again, I couldn't I don't know if I could just like nail it down to one person. Hmm. Because if it had been made in the 30s, it probably would have been made as a serial, or it would have been a studio movie with less focus on action, and it would have been more of just a straight adventure film, like the first version of King Solomon's Mines or Gunga Din, or stuff like that. So yeah, that'd be something to kind of ruminate over. Um, I'll have to think about that. Um, Speed 2 wouldn't have gotten half the flack had it not been titled as Cruise Control. It's a reasonable film. Yeah. It's definitely one of those head scratchers where you see it and you're like, this isn't that bad. Why does it have such a reputation? But yeah, I think everybody got tired of the sequel monikers, and then it was like even the movie Speed, which was just about a bus, gets a sequel, Speed 2 Cruise Control. I can say, okay, was the subtitle necessary? Um Oh, Midnight Run is phenomenal. Midnight Run is one of the great unheralded gems of the 1980s. That movie is just wow. I get why Beverly Hills Cop is viewed as important. I'm not a big fan of it, but they were both directed by Martin Brest, and Midnight Run is the best thing he ever did. It's phenomenal. If you've never seen it, please do. It's the movie that proved that Robert De Niro could do comedy, and the pairing of him with Charles Grodin is just like you can't make this stuff up. It's so phenomenally great. You wouldn't believe how well they play off of each other, and it's a simple, straightforward plot, and it becomes essentially a road movie where De Niro's bounty hunter character has to escort the mob accountant on the run, Charles Grodin, back to be processed by the judicial system without being killed by the mob on the way. And then one thing leads to another, to where not only the mob but the law themselves, or everyone is chasing these guys, and they basically have to go cross country because first thing, they can't fly because Charles Grodin's character is terrified of flying. He can't fly. He can't do it. He can't do and one thing leads to another, and the whole movie hinges on just the eternal exasperation of Robert De Niro's face in that movie, as just this guy who's just trying to do his job. He just wants to get the job and done and get paid for it. That's it. And it's just like everything goes wrong. Everything goes wrong. So I mean, in some ways, it's like the old Bob Hope, Bing Crosby Road movies, and some ways it's like it's a mad, 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 mad world. In some ways, it's like planes, trains, and automobiles. Most of all, probably, but it's just fantastic. It's so underrated and undervalued, and it didn't really get discovered until it started getting shown on cable a lot. That's where I first saw it growing up. I would see pieces of it and realize, wait, Robert De Niro could be funny. What is this? Um, he's with the guy from the Beethoven movies. What is going on? Um, and I love Charles Grodin in other stuff besides the more goofy family oriented comedies that he's most well known for. So I adore Midnight Run. I really need to get the Shout Blu-ray. It's the best Blu-ray on the market, but again, with Shout factory pricing, it's like this should be a $10 or $15 Blu-ray, and it's $30, and I'm like, I'm not going to pay twice as much for a Blu-ray I know isn't even that great, even though I adore this movie. Why do you do this? Shout? I would have more of your products if you didn't overcharge so much. But yeah, if you've never seen Midnight Run, highest recommendations. It's phenomenal. Like I said, I think it's of course, Martin Brest also directed Geely, so he has definite highs and definite lows as a director. But I think Midnight Run is a great film and stupendously better than Beverly Hills Cop, which I find really overrated. But again, I understand the importance and stuff. But if I had to choose, I mean, I think 48 Hours is amazing, and I really like Eddie Murphy, but if I have to choose between 48 Hours and Beverly Hills Cop, I choose 48 Hours every time. But yeah, Midnight Run, long story short, absolutely fantastic. Just keep in mind that Siskel gave thumbs down for Aliens, Last Crusade, Casino, and Apocalypse Now. Yeah, uh, with Gene Siskel though, at least like all great critics, at least he said why. And you may not get it as much in the Siskel and Ebert shows because they have less time to talk, but you could always see where he came from. And especially back then, when you went through all the summer movies, they would get bombarded with all of them like what we do now, but of course they had no idea what we go through now. So what was to them back in the day maybe a bit much or not very good, and they would say, well, it's okay, so thumbs down from me. It's not really worth making the trip to the theater for. Whereas now that would be like the best picture winner of the year because it's so good in comparison to all the junk we have now. So it is a bit of you have that bit of it was a different time in that regard. But yeah, there are some head scratchers where Gene gave thumbs down to it, and I'm just like, what? And then there are times where Roger didn't like things, and I'm just like, oh my God, what? How? But as all great critics do, they could admit when they were wrong, and that is something that people just don't do anymore, especially officially, especially in print. When Roger Ebert put Blade Runner on his greatest movies list, and finally it was like, you know what, it may have taken me 25 years in saying the final cut version, but I was wrong in 1982, and it took me 25 years to realize it, but I'm saying it now, because that's what critics used to do. That's what you should do. You should think about things, mull about things. And again, people have to meet deadlines, so they don't have that opportunity always. So sometimes they may be wrong. Sometimes they may have a different opinion, but at least it's an opinion. If they give the reasons why, I respect that, even if I may be tearing my hair out going, what is wrong with you? So yeah, it's always interesting to see their total opposite reactions on certain titles that it seems the collective of everybody else seems to adore. Occasionally you get ones like that. As far as the Austin Powers, I've never gotten them on LD because it's the first one's always eluded me, and it had that aspect ratio issue. So I just have the Blu-rays of 1 through 3, and they all look pretty nice, and they fixed the aspect ratio on 1, which was always like a different ratio on laser and the different on DVD because it was a Super 35 film. I mean, it's kind of complicated with me on those because I remember I saw the first one as a kid in the theater, and I was like the only one laughing at all the Bond jokes because I got all the references, and I was, of course, like 6 or 7 at the time, and the rest of the theater didn't laugh at any of them, whereas I thought they were hysterical that they had an Odd Job stand-in throwing a shoe and all that stuff, and so I didn't really care about all the other stuff. I just cared about the Bond jokes and the 60s spy jokes. I think they have great potential, and there are great memorable pieces from them, especially if you're a spy nerd like myself. But I have real issues with them because they just went right for the toilet humor, and they just forget about, being witty or doing more with the premise after the first film. So there are gags I love in all 3. And the fact that they got Michael Caine and Goldmember is just, it's Michael Caine. That alone is just, I have to like it for that. But yeah, I just wish they were, had more intelligence behind them, because I think it's a great concept, and obviously it works with audiences, and they made money, and they should do a 4th one. I don't know why they didn't, but then Mike Myers went and did stuff like The Love Guru, which nobody saw because it was horrible. So it's like, I don't know. They need good writing in them. They really do, because the movie that inspired them most is, I think, genius. And that is the 1967 Casino Royale, because that is the film that inspired Austin Powers 100%. and it's a better film than Austin Powers, even though the 67 Casino Royale is the textbook of how to not make a movie. It's amazing. It's full of intelligent jokes. So I think the potential is there. I just wish they would live up to that, you know. So let's see. Oh, Wolf revisited Midnight Run for the. Oh, hadn't seen it since the original initial release. Wow, that's a that's a long gap, but yeah, it's always great to go back to. Um, yeah, Scanner Darkly being more accurate. Yeah, I was just pleasantly surprised. It's I would agree it's not my favorite story of Dick's either. I only read it once, but I hadn't even intended on seeing it, and I just had the opportunity to, and I watched it. And I'm like, wow, that was actually pretty good. Okay, Um, let's see. Pete had to step out. Yeah, I probably got to be. I don't even know what time it is. Yeah, it's pretty late on my end. I probably got to be winding it down myself. Um, so get to these last couple ones real fast. So yeah, I didn't even realize how late it was. So get to these real fast. Talking about the Warner Archive TV version of Superman. Um, yeah, I really do like that. It's much more natural because they just did a scan of the the TV cut interpositive, so it's very much a well, you don't have the problems with the teal infusion like you do on the newer mastered disc of the 1 through 4 Blu-rays. So the theatrical version of 1, um, the theatrical 2, and then 3 and 4 on Blu-ray have teal in the time of the color timing, which really is unfortunate. Otherwise, the scans are great. But the TV cut of Superman doesn't have that problem. Warner Archive went and just scanned the TV interpositive. It's more of a warts and all approach, but it's really clean. It looks amazing. And honestly, it looks better than the theatrical cut Blu-ray does because it doesn't have that color issue. So you wish the theatrical cut Blu-ray looked as good as the TV cut version because personally, I think it's cool to see that. It's amazing to finally see that officially released, but you don't need all those scenes. I think the theatrical cut was perfect to begin with. I'm one of those. I don't even like the extra stuff from the special edition, even though it's only like 10 or 15 minutes extra. And that special edition master is pretty old. That Blu-ray doesn't have the color problems either. So you watch either other disc and they look fine. You watch the theatrical cut, great new scan, not so good color. And the same thing for the theatrical cut of 2, great new scan, not so good color. And then 3 and 4 are just teal crazy. So I'm like, so I saw that and then was like, you know what? Let me get the DVDs just to have on hand. So I bought the metal tin on eBay and they're dirt cheap. So I bought the whole tin for like only $4 because I was like, what? So if you really want to cover yourself on all bases, just do what I did and get one of the old DVD sets for the old transfers too. The 4K doesn't have those problems. It does have the all important 70 millimeter mix on there, which was only previously available on the Laserdisc and is the best audio mix for the original film and is so much better than the Dolby Stereo. It's not even funny. But it doesn't necessarily play with everybody's 4K displays very well because it's a very grainy film, very diffusion oriented, very soft film. So it didn't get a lot of great reviews from most reviewers because they just weren't used to what the film's supposed to look like. It's a very difficult film to transfer. So I do think the 4K is the best option, but of course you got to hang on to the TV cut disc and the other disc for the other versions and the extras and stuff like that. Um, I sat Joker out because I really didn't feel like it. Now that it's getting through awards season, I'm probably just gonna finally sit down and watch it just to get it over with. But it's just one of those things where it's just like I kind of know where they're going with this. I really don't care to see this. Like I've read so many Joker origins and Joker stories and seen so many versions of Joker. I'm kind of just like, eh. And then I love King of Comedy and Taxi Driver and that era of Scorsese. So I really don't feel like watching like a redo of that, and they've got De Niro in there, and it feels very King of Comedy, and I'm just like, I don't, I would rather watch King of Comedy. I don't want to see somebody like do their version of that with grease paint. But yeah, I'm gonna see it, before the Oscars, like I do with most of the others, so then I can judge for myself and try to do my own awards ballot. But yeah, if that's an answer. Um, Saw Star Wars 9, hated the ending, cannot pretend to be unbiased, seeing as how much I love the unaltered trilogy and the expanded universe. Yeah, yeah, Rise of Skywalker is painful. Like, yeah, if you've ever read any EU, if you've been a fan for any amount of time, it's like you can't sit through without just doing this or like laughing to yourself in a defeated tone, just like, it doesn't work like that. But oh god, what are they doing? Oh geez, I should just go now. Can I make it to the rest of this? Oh man. Some of those abilities would have come in handy earlier on, of course, the whole magic force healing thing and if I go down that road, I'll be blabbering on forever and ever. But anyway, yeah, I gotta wind it down on my end. I always run way later than what I realize it is. But yeah, on that note, yeah, just those who haven't seen Rise of Skywalker yet, just read up on it, make of it what you will. But yeah, it's yeah. All you can say is at least it's not The Last Jedi. That's practically it. Hmm. Yeah, Metro. I think you got that in a nutshell. Yep. So anyway, to wind down and wrap up for the evening, I thank everybody for hanging out as always. It's always fun. Hopefully I didn't blabber on too long. And I'm really happy to talk about the Thin Man series because I think it's actually really, really important. And I think they're just a wonderful series of films to go back and revisit or find for the first time. And especially since Warner Archive put together this stunning release the past year, which is easily one of the 5 best discs of 2019 of any format, even though it's not a 4K disc. It's stunning what they were able to achieve. And again, there's a reason why this film is in the National Film Registry. It's that important. So definitely go pick up the Warner Archive Blu-ray of The Thin Man and check out all the 5 sequels and enjoy the series and see what you think of them. Yeah, or find the DVDs or catch it on TCM if Comcast didn't steal it from you. Got to work in that joke one more time. But anyway, as always, thanks everybody. It's always a pleasure, and keep your physical media spending. And as always, have a better one all.